Will to live, the stubborn flame that just will not go out. Before we begin tonight's gentle spiral into philosophical confusion and slightly sarcastic introspection, take a moment to subscribe, hit the like button, and ring that tiny, metaphorical bell. This channel exists for sleepy thinkers, midnight meaning hunters, and fans of paradoxes that feel like emotional Sudoku. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, even the cryptic ones written like riddles. Now, breathe, get cozy. Let us whisper to the part of your brain that is still awake and ask, why do we keep going, even when nothing makes sense? Welcome to the paradox of the will to live. This one is not about ships or soup. It is about you and me and everyone who has ever stared into the fridge at 2 a.m. and wondered why we are still trying to meal prep when the universe is 13 billion years old and slowly unraveling like a roll of cheap paper towels. The will to live is strange. It is irrational. It is stubborn. It is the part of you that screams nope when everything else says, maybe just lie down forever. It is the voice that tells your body to heal, even when your mind is screaming into a philosophical void. It is that flicker of light inside that keeps showing up for life, even when life shows up late and forgets your name. And the best part? No one really knows why it is there. Let us zoom out, way out. Biologists will tell you the will to live is evolutionary, a survival mechanism, the thing that makes animals run from predators, avoid cliffs, and scream when they stub their toes. In this view, your will to live is just natural selection tap dancing in your nervous system. You live because your ancestors lived long enough to reproduce and pass on the programming that told them, avoid tigers, and maybe do not eat the glowing mushrooms. Psychologists, on the other hand, might say it is about meaning, that we keep going because we build little ladders of purpose, careers, families, passions, revenge plots against slow-walking tourists. These ladders give us something to climb, even when we are not sure what is at the top. But philosophers love this one. They ask the uncomfortable question. If life is full of suffering, absurdity, and confusion, why do we keep choosing it? Enter Arthur Schopenhauer, who basically invented philosophical grumpiness. He believed the will to live was a blind primal force, irrational, unconscious, and totally unstoppable. Not because life is good, but because life wants itself, even if you do not. According to Schopenhauer, the will to live is like that one friend who drags you to brunch every Sunday, even though you hate mimosas and the concept of brunch itself. It just keeps insisting, come on, let us exist. It'll be fun. Then came Freud, who took that idea and added another delightful twist. Not only do we have a will to live, but we also have a death drive. Because apparently, one existential tug-of-war was not enough. Still with me? Good. Let us bring this paradox into the present moment. Have you ever had a day where you felt totally done? The world felt too loud, your inbox too full. Your shampoo bottle betrayed you by being empty when you needed it most. And still, somewhere inside, you brushed your teeth. You drank some water. You looked both ways before crossing the street. Why? That is the paradox. The will to live persists even when logic says it should not. It shows up in quiet ways, in the breath you take without thinking, in the way your wounds try to close, in the way people rebuild cities after earthquakes, or try dating apps again after swearing them off forever. That is arguably more courageous. It shows up in comedy, in tragedy, in memes about anxiety. It shows up in hospice centers, in kindergarten classrooms, and YouTube comments that say, I really needed this today. And perhaps most beautifully, it shows up even in the face of despair. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote about this in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He observed that people who survived the concentration camps often held on to some tiny sense of purpose, a loved one, a future goal, a belief that there was meaning, even in suffering. That purpose, he argued, kept them alive. So maybe the will to live is not just biology. Maybe it is storytelling. Maybe it is the narrative you wrap around your pain that lets you endure it. The belief that this is not the end, that something is waiting, that you matter. Or maybe it is just stubbornness, because if you think about it, life is exhausting. You need food, shelter, Wi-Fi, validation, hydration, hope, and at least 3 different streaming services. Yet here you are, still showing up, still breathing, still making coffee like the universe is not spinning toward heat death. Is that not beautiful? The will to live, then, is not always noble. It is not always glamorous. Sometimes it is messy, awkward, contradictory. It can live alongside apathy, grief, and memes that say, "I want to disappear," but are posted by someone who still remembered to add a hashtag. It can look like someone checking themselves into therapy, or canceling therapy but rescheduling it for next week. Or texting a friend, "I am not okay," which, let us be honest, is one of the most courageous sentences in the human language. It can look like a plant growing through a crack in the sidewalk, not because it should, but because it can. And that is the heart of the paradox. We live even when we do not know why, even when we are tired, even when everything hurts and the news is awful and your favorite shirt shrank in the wash. The will to live is not logical. It is not efficient. It is not clean. But it is real. And sometimes it is funny, like when you cry for 3 hours, then suddenly get excited about garlic bread. Or when your cat walks across your laptop during a breakdown and you think, "Well, I guess I should stick around to feed this furry disappointment." The will to live is defiant. It is rebellious. It is the universe's middle finger to entropy. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough. Because maybe life is not about being happy all the time. Maybe it is about participating, watching the chaos unfold, laughing at the absurdity, crying at the beauty, screaming into pillows and then ordering sushi. Maybe the will to live is not about joy. Maybe it is about curiosity, that deep, strange itch that asks, what happens next? Maybe the most philosophical thing you can do is simply keep going, even when you are confused, especially when you are confused. So here we are, dear viewer. Another night, another paradox. You could be asleep, you should be asleep, but something inside you wanted to hear this. That means something. And if you have made it this far, you are living proof of the paradox. You exist. You are thinking. You are listening to a stranger on the internet talk about garlic bread and Schopenhauer, and somehow it matters. So what is the solution to the paradox of the will to live? There is not one, but maybe that is the answer. That life is not a puzzle to solve, but a story to keep telling. That continuing, despite everything, is a kind of quiet victory. And now, before we part ways, I will leave you with one final question. If your will to live can survive tax season, grocery store lines, and a world that still thinks password monkey 3 is secure, is it not basically immortal? Hell is other people, a social paradox, dressed as a dinner guest. There is a strange moment that occurs in almost every human life. It happens in elevators, in group chats, at weddings, or during customer service phone calls. It is the realization that being around other people can feel like an emotional obstacle course made of eye contact, opinions, and questionable small talk about weather patterns. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once captured this exact sensation with a phrase so hauntingly accurate, it echoes through every awkward social gathering and every group project ever assigned. Hell is other people. That is the paradox. Humans are social creatures. We are wired to bond, to gather, to connect. And yet, at the same time, other people can feel like a full-time job with unpaid overtime, mysterious expectations, and constant meetings that could have been emails. Let us walk slowly through this fire. The phrase, hell is other people, comes from Sartre's play, No Exit. In it, 3 characters find themselves in a room. They are all dead. They are all stuck together. There are no mirrors, no windows, and no doors. Just endless reflection of themselves through the judgments of others. They come to realize something painful. They cannot escape how others see them. And worse, they cannot control it. The room becomes unbearable, not because it is hot, or because there are pitchforks, or because Nickelback is playing on a loop, but because they are trapped with each other. That is where Sartre delivers the line. Not with anger, not with melodrama, just a quiet, brutal truth. Hell is other people. Now, before you abandon all human interaction and decide to live in a cave with only a cactus for company, let us unpack what he meant. Because like all good paradoxes, this one is more about how we think than how we feel. Sartre was not saying that other people are evil. He was saying that the existence of others makes us see ourselves differently, and that can be deeply uncomfortable. Imagine this. You are dancing alone in your room. You feel free, majestic, possibly like Beyoncé. Now add one person watching you through a cracked door. Suddenly you are no longer Beyoncé. You are a confused person doing karate in slow motion. Your self-awareness spikes like bad Wi-Fi. That is Sartre's hell. Other people become mirrors, not always kind mirrors. Sometimes funhouse mirrors. Sometimes bathroom mirrors under terrible lighting when you have not slept and you regret every life choice, including breakfast. It is not just embarrassment. It is the existential weight of being observed, judged, misunderstood, defined by someone else's gaze. And yet, here is the twist. We need people. We need validation. We need connection. We need someone to text when our package says, "delivered," but has mysteriously vanished. We are social by design. Isolation, over time, messes with our minds. Loneliness can be more dangerous than smoking. That is not poetry. That is science. So here is the paradox. People are both the cause of our discomfort and the cure for our loneliness. We push people away because they make us feel vulnerable. Then we miss them because we feel alone. Then we return to them. Then we remember why we needed a break. It is a cycle, like laundry or doom scrolling, and it gets deeper. Sartre believed that our identity is shaped not by who we think we are, but by how others perceive us. You might think you are kind, smart, and mysterious, but if everyone in your life sees you as clingy, loud, and suspiciously obsessed with frogs, then those external perceptions start to affect your internal sense of self. It is unsettling. It means your self-image is not entirely your own. It is built, in part, by the reactions of other people, their judgments, their misunderstandings, their awkward facial expressions when you explain your dreams in too much detail. And there is no escape from this. Even in solitude, you carry the imagined gaze of others. You replay conversations. You hear phantom critiques. You think, what would my mother say if she saw me eating cereal for dinner again? That imagined judgment is part of the human condition. But here is where things get interesting. The paradox also works in reverse. You are someone else's hell. Yes, you. You are the person someone thinks about when they cringe at a memory. You are the reason someone deleted a social media post. You are the one who misread a tone, interrupted a story, forgot a name. Just as others make you feel seen, you make others feel exposed. And you probably did not mean to. Just like they did not mean to do it to you. That is the strange tenderness inside this paradox. Everyone is stumbling through the same social maze, bumping into each other with the best intentions and the worst timing. That knowledge, while mildly horrifying, can also be freeing. If everyone is self-conscious, then maybe your awkwardness is not being judged as harshly as you imagine. If everyone is worried about being seen, then maybe they are not focused on how you look, but on whether their joke landed. You begin to see the shared absurdity. Think about meetings. Everyone is pretending to understand the spreadsheet. No one does. Think about parties. Everyone is pretending to enjoy the music. No one does. Think about group chats. Everyone is reacting with emojis to avoid saying, I do not know how to respond to this emotionally heavy message, but I care. We are all in the same room, just like Sartre's play. But unlike his characters, we are not doomed. We have doors. We can leave. We can apologize. We can learn. We can change the lighting in the mirror. And that is the hopeful part of this paradox. While other people can reflect uncomfortable truths back at us, they can also reflect kindness, humor, affection, growth. One person might misunderstand you. Another might see something in you that you had forgotten was there. A talent, a strength, a spark. That reflection can pull you out of yourself. It can make you better. So maybe hell is other people, but so is redemption. The friend who sends you a playlist when you are sad. The stranger who returns your lost wallet. The teacher who believed in you when you did not believe in yourself. These moments matter. These people matter. They are not just reflections. They are reminders of who you are, of who you could be. And perhaps that is the real power of this paradox. It teaches us that identity is not a fortress. It is a garden. It grows when others shine light on it. Yes, sometimes the light reveals weeds, but sometimes it reveals flowers you forgot were blooming. You might be misunderstood. You might feel exposed, but you are also connected, supported, remembered. So do not fear the gaze. Learn from it. Shape it. Laugh at it. Because while hell may be other people, so is everything else that makes life worth living. Inside jokes, surprise hugs, shared silence, and the relief of being truly seen and accepted anyway. And now, as we slowly back out of this social spiral and tuck our existential anxieties into bed, I will leave you with one final thought. If hell is other people, then why do group projects still exist? Saden Nihilism. When nothing matters, but you still feel sad about it. Imagine sitting on your couch, a half-eaten snack in your lap, the TV softly glowing in the distance. You just read a headline about the heat death of the universe. Your inbox is full of unopened emails from 5 years ago, and suddenly, a small voice in your head whispers, "None of this matters." You nod, you agree. But instead of feeling free or light or even curious, you feel something heavy. Something strange. Something that says, if nothing matters, why do I still feel sad? Welcome to Saden Nihilism, a quiet, persistent paradox that combines the hopelessness of nihilism with the emotional fatigue of a Sunday afternoon that never ends. At its core, nihilism is a belief, or perhaps more accurately, a mood, that life has no inherent meaning, purpose, or value. That the universe is not guided by a divine plan, a cosmic blueprint, or even a vague sense of direction. Everything just is. To a classical nihilist, this revelation should be liberating. If there is no meaning, then there is no pressure. You are not required to become someone. You do not need to prove anything. You are free to live, eat cake for breakfast, name your plants after philosophers, and wear pajamas to weddings, assuming you were invited in the first place. But Saden nihilism is different. It is not content with apathy. It is nihilism with emotional weather. And the forecast is always a little bit grey. Saden nihilism says, nothing matters, and then sighs, not in a dramatic way. More like your soul has just remembered an appointment it forgot to cancel. So let us take a slow, meditative stroll through this sad little paradox. We will start with the first piece. Nihilism itself. The term comes from the Latin nihil, meaning nothing. Not a little, not less, not almost. Literally nothing. Friedrich Nietzsche was one of the first to popularize the idea in philosophy, though he did not invent it. He described nihilism as the inevitable outcome of a world that has lost its foundational beliefs, particularly the belief in God, morality, and objective truth. He saw it as a kind of existential earthquake. The ground no longer holds. Everything is up for questioning. You wake up and realize the compass you were using might have just been a novelty item. But here is where it becomes strange. If life has no inherent meaning, That should logically lead to indifference. Shrug your shoulders. Carry on. Eat spaghetti while the void stares back. Instead, what people often feel is despair. Not because they expected meaning, but because the absence of it feels unnatural. We are creatures designed to seek purpose. Our brains are meaning-generating factories. We interpret patterns in clouds, invent stories about our cat's facial expressions, and assign symbolic value to birthday candles. So when faced with the idea that the universe does not care, we do not become neutral. We become sad, lost, empty, but not in a peaceful way. This is Saden Nihilism. It is not the intellectual conclusion that life is meaningless. It is the emotional aftermath. Imagine standing in a room filled with confetti, balloons, and cake, only to discover the party was never for you. No one invited you. The decorations just happened to be there. You feel both out of place and oddly responsible for your own disappointment. Let us now pause for a moment and recognize something strange about this emotion. It is illogical. If you truly believed nothing mattered, you should not care. You should not feel grief over a lack of purpose any more than you feel grief about the square root of a negative banana. But you do care. You feel the emptiness. You mourn the missing meaning. That is what makes it a paradox. Your logic says, this is the truth. Your emotions say, I do not like it. And your body, caught in the middle, eats chips in the dark and avoids phone calls. Saden Nihilism is not just a concept. It is an experience. You see it in late-night tweets. You see it in existential memes. You see it in songs that sound like rainy sidewalks and the echo of a vending machine failing to deliver a snack. You see it in the question, what is the point? Spoken not in anger, but in quiet exhaustion. And yet people keep asking the question. They do not stop. They search. They explore. They create. This is where things get even more peculiar. Because while Saden Nihilism says that meaning does not exist, humans keep trying to make it anyway. A child picks up a rock and names it Steve. A poet writes 800 words about the color blue. A chef adds parsley to a plate, knowing the parsley serves no nutritional purpose. Why? Because even in the face of nothing, we reach. That is the beautiful contradiction buried inside Saden Nihilism. It acknowledges the absence of meaning and still wants to matter. There is a phrase that floats through certain circles. Existence is meaningless, but make tea anyway. That is the spirit of this paradox. It is not about solving it. It is about noticing it, sitting beside it, and perhaps offering it a snack. Even some of the most famous existential thinkers, despite their bleak pronouncements, ultimately concluded that meaning is not something to find. It is something to make. Albert Camus, the patron saint of philosophical gloom, said we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Yes, that Sisyphus. The guy cursed to push a rock up a hill for all eternity. Camus believed that once Sisyphus accepted the absurdity of his task, he could also reclaim his agency. His suffering became defiance. His rock became rebellion. So what does that mean for us? It means Saden Nihilism does not have to be a dead end. It can be a resting place, a space between loss and reinvention. When nothing feels real, you get to choose what becomes real. When no script exists, you get to write one. When the universe offers you silence, you can sing into it, even if the song is off-key and mostly about soup. Of course, this does not mean the sadness disappears. Emotions do not vanish just because we understand them, but they can become softer, familiar, like background noise at a cafe. Always there, but not the whole experience. And maybe that is the point. Maybe Saden Nihilism is not something to cure. Maybe it is a companion. A quiet reminder that life is fragile, absurd, and occasionally ridiculous, but also yours. So yes, the stars do not care. The void is vast. The laws of physics do not reward kindness or creativity or effort. But that does not mean you cannot. Because even if nothing matters in the cosmic sense, it can still matter to you. That is not delusion. That is humanity, That is the small, stubborn, beautiful rebellion that defines every day you get out of bed and decide to try again. Saden Nihilism says, there is no meaning. You say, fine, I will make my own. You say it with art, with kindness, with breakfast burritos and birthday cards and late-night talks that stretch until the sky turns pink. You say it by being here, listening, wondering, feeling, and maybe, just maybe, that is enough. Now, before this chapter folds itself back into the void like a lonely napkin, I will leave you with one final question. If nothing matters, does that mean pineapple on pizza is philosophically valid? Dysteleological suffering, the pain without a point. Somewhere in the swirling chaos of your average weekday, you stub your toe. It hurts. You shout something that echoes off the walls and scares the cat. And as the pain lingers, a question floats to the top of your mind. Not, where is the ice? Or, why me? But something much more sinister. What was the point of that? This is where dysteleological suffering steps in. Quietly. Like an unwelcome guest who did not even bring snacks. Dysteleological suffering is a fancy philosophical term that describes suffering with no purpose, no lesson, no silver lining, no divine message hidden in the bruises. Just pain. Existing for the simple, agonizing fact that it can. In simpler terms, it is when bad things happen, and nothing meaningful comes out of them. No character growth, no poetic closure, just existential paperwork with no explanation. Let us begin by pulling apart this heavy word, dysteleological. It comes from telos, a Greek word meaning purpose or goal. The prefix dys means bad or wrong. So dysteleological means wrong purpose, or more precisely, lack of any purposeful design. Add suffering to the end, and you get one of the most emotionally inconvenient ideas in philosophy. Most of us like to think that suffering means something, that there is a deeper narrative behind the things that hurt us. Maybe we were meant to grow. Maybe it made us stronger. Maybe it saved us from a worse fate. We tell these stories to survive the chaos. But what if that story never arrives? What if the pain just exists and keeps existing? That is the paradox. Humans crave meaning, even in misery. We want the pain to be part of something. But sometimes it is not. Picture this. A person slips on a wet floor and breaks their arm. Months of hospital bills, lost wages, physical therapy. No spiritual awakening, no character development, no hidden wisdom in the X-rays, just a banana peel and a lawsuit. That is dysteleological suffering. It is not rare. It is everywhere. Natural disasters, childhood illness, collapsing buildings, random acts of cruelty. You search for the moral of the story, and there is none. Just rubble, just grief, just that terrible hollow silence that says, this happened, and no one knows why. Some philosophies try to make peace with this. Buddhism, for example, accepts suffering as a part of existence. Life involves pain, aging, sickness, death. These are inescapable. But it offers a way to detach, to let go of the craving for control and explanation. Others, like certain religious traditions, propose that suffering is part of a divine plan, that it serves a purpose, even if we cannot see it yet, that every tear is counted, that there is a meaning, but it exists in a dimension we have not unlocked. And then there is dysteleological suffering, which simply says, there is no plan. The pain does not teach, it does not redeem, it just is. This does not mean you are hopeless, it means you are honest. Because sometimes, insisting that every tragedy must serve a purpose can feel cruel. It can feel like demanding a child explain how their loss helped them grow. It can feel like painting flowers on a collapsed bridge. Dysteleological suffering does not want your silver linings. It wants your presence, your awareness, your willingness to sit in the dark without trying to flip on a metaphorical light switch. Let us go back in time for a moment. During the Lisbon earthquake of 1755, one of the deadliest in history, tens of thousands died in a single day. Churches collapsed on congregations. Fires swept the city. Tsunamis followed. Voltaire, the French philosopher, witnessed the aftermath and asked the question that would shake centuries of belief. How could a just and loving God allow this? Up until then, many believed in theodicy, that suffering served a moral or divine purpose. That pain was proof of a greater plan. Voltaire was not convinced. He saw innocent lives crushed and concluded very simply that sometimes nature does not care. That earthquake became a symbol, a moment when people began to publicly wonder if suffering might not always come with a lesson, if pain could exist without redemption, if the universe might be more chaos than curriculum. Today, the echoes of that doubt remain. Dysteleological suffering is what we feel when we sit with grief that offers no clarity, when we see good people lose everything and the world just keeps spinning, when we realize that the universe does not send sympathy cards. And yet, here is where it becomes a paradox. Even when suffering appears meaningless, we still try to give it meaning. We light candles, we build memorials, we write poems. We ask how we can prevent it next time. We gather together in the face of it, because we cannot bear to let it stand alone. Dysteleological suffering says, there is no reason. We reply, then we will make one. That response is not delusional. It is deeply human. Meaning is not always found. Sometimes it is created, not as a cover-up, but as a form of resistance, a way of refusing to let suffering be the final word. You see this in art, in activism, in conversations that begin with, I do not know what to say, but I am here. You see it in those who carry their pain like weathered journals. No lesson at the end, just the weight of what happened and the grace of having survived it. You see it in humor, in gallows jokes made between chemo treatments, in ironic tattoos, in the fragile, weird laughter that bubbles up when you realize the absurdity of being alive on a spinning rock where gravity exists and toilets flush backwards in Australia. Even if the suffering has no meaning, the response can be meaningful. This does not erase the pain. It does not make it okay. It simply acknowledges that sometimes the only light in the darkness is the one we bring with us. That is the paradox inside the paradox. Dysteleological suffering tells us that pain may not be justified, but somehow we keep showing up. We keep healing. We keep trying to be kind, even when the universe is not. So perhaps the goal is not to find the meaning in every wound. Perhaps the goal is to witness the wound and decide to live anyway. To love anyway. To dance anyway. Even if the music stopped long ago. And maybe that is the quiet miracle, that in a world where suffering can be random and pointless and cruel, people still write lullabies. People still plant trees they will never see grow. People still hold hands in hospital rooms and whisper, I am with you. That presence is not a solution. It is not a philosophy. It is not even an answer. But it matters. And now, as we gently fold this paradox back into the strange tapestry of your thoughts, I will leave you with one final question. If pain has no purpose, does that mean paper cuts are just spiteful? Abjection, the emotional dumpster behind the human mind. There are things you cannot look away from. A moldy sandwich on a bus seat, a toenail clipping in a public pool. That moment someone sneezes and no one says anything. Something deep inside you recoils, wrinkles, shrinks back in soft horror. Your stomach churns, your brain sounds the alarm, and a quiet part of your soul whispers, no, absolutely not. Congratulations. You have just experienced abjection. Abjection is not simply disgust. It is not just revulsion. It is deeper, stranger. It lives in the borderlands between self and not self, where the things you reject also remind you a little too much of yourself. It is the psychological paradox of wanting something gone while secretly knowing it is part of you. It is the creeping discomfort that arises not just because something is dirty, but because it threatens the idea of who you are. It blurs the boundary between your clean little identity and the chaos of the world beyond your skin. Let us peel this open carefully. The term abjection became popular thanks to philosopher and psychoanalyst Julia Kristeva, who gave it a name in her 1980 book Powers of Horror, which, as far as titles go, feels entirely appropriate. According to Kristeva, abjection is what happens when the human mind comes face to face with something that should not exist, at least not in that space, at that time, in that way. Take blood, for example. Inside your body, it is fine, wonderful even, essential. But the moment it leaves your body and appears on your bathroom sink, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes threatening, abject. The same goes for vomit, or bodily fluids in general, or anything that reminds you that you are made of stuff, wet, leaky, mortal stuff. Abjection is a psychic defense mechanism. It helps define the limits of yourself by rejecting anything that reminds you those limits are fragile. It says, this is me, that is not me, and that over there, whatever it is, needs to leave immediately. But here is where the paradox creeps in. Abjection draws a line between self and other, but the line is blurry. The things we abject are often deeply connected to our own existence. We are horrified by the corpse because it looks like us without life. We are unsettled by decay because we know we will decay. We recoil from excrement because it is a reminder that our insides have outsides. We object what we fear we might become. And that is where abjection moves from physical revulsion into emotional horror. Think of shame. Think of guilt. Think of the way certain thoughts bubble up in your mind, and you immediately try to shove them back down, pretend they never arrived, disinfect your soul with polite thoughts about dogs and iced tea. That is abjection too. Kristeva argued that abjection is not just a bodily experience. It is a moral one, a social one, a psychological one. We do not just reject the rotting meat on the counter. We reject the parts of ourselves that feel wrong, the grief we cannot name, the fantasies we fear, the desires we cannot admit. We shove them into the emotional dumpster behind the mind and pretend it does not exist. But it does. And it smells weird. Let us take this into the social realm. Abjection is not just internal, it is cultural. Societies abject things too. The outcast, the criminal, the foreign, the sick, the mentally unwell, the inconvenient. Anything that threatens the tidy narrative of what a normal person is supposed to be. Whole groups of people can become abjected, not because they are inherently wrong, but because their existence threatens the illusion of a clean, controlled world. That is the dangerous side of abjection. It can become the psychological soil where stigma, exclusion, and dehumanization grow. It starts with, "That is not me," and ends with, "That should not exist." And yet, here comes the twist again. We are drawn to it. We cannot stop looking. We watch horror movies. We rubberneck at accidents. We read true crime at midnight with the door locked and a cup of tea that suddenly tastes like dread. Why? Because abjection is fascinating. It is the monster under the bed that wears your face. It is the whisper that says, "What if you are not as separate from the world as you think you are?" That is not just terrifying. That is profound. Because abjection also reveals something honest. It tells the truth that polite society would rather cover with doilies and scented candles. It says, you are not a clean line. You are a boundary in flux. You are body and thought and feeling and memory and mystery, and all of it leaks into everything else. The very act of being alive means being surrounded by things that unsettle you, things that feel both alien and familiar. That is abjection. It is why people fear mental illness. Not because it is foreign, but because it is uncomfortably close. It is why people react strongly to grief. Not because it is rare, but because it touches something buried inside them. And yet again, the paradox continues. What we reject, we carry. You do not erase shame by ignoring it. You do not eliminate fear by pretending it is not real. The parts of yourself you try to banish have a way of sneaking back in, through dreams, through mistakes, through the long, silent stare you give your own reflection at 3 a.m. That is the work of abjection, It is always there, sweeping the edges of the self, whispering that there is no true edge at all. So what are you supposed to do? Some say you should confront the abject, sit with it, study it, befriend it. Others say that is a good way to lose your mind. Still others say that abjection is not a problem to solve, but a reality to understand. You do not have to embrace the moldy sandwich, but you can understand why it unsettles you. You can begin to notice when your reaction to something might be more about the fear of collapse than the thing itself. You can become curious about your own disgust, your own shame, your own sudden urge to avoid, to exile, to bury. Because abjection is not going anywhere. It is part of the structure of consciousness. The price of having a boundary is noticing what threatens it. And maybe that is not tragic. Maybe it is just honest. You are not a fortress. You are not a marble statue. You are a messy, porous, emotional miracle trying to make sense of a world where eggs smell bad and sometimes people say things like moist and expect you to just be okay with it. So the next time you recoil, hesitate, or whisper nope to an experience you cannot quite name, pause. You might be meeting a little piece of yourself you did not want to see. You do not have to love it, but you might want to listen. And now, as we step carefully away from the psychological swamp that is abjection, I will leave you with one final question. If spilled milk makes you gag, does that make lactose your shadow self? God is dead. The existential hangover that changed everything. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that the central figure of your universe has vanished. No note, no explanation, no dramatic lightning bolt exit, just gone. The sun still rises, coffee still tastes like hope, but something enormous and invisible is missing. And now everyone is pretending to be fine while quietly wondering what just happened. This is what philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche meant when he declared, "God is dead." He did not mean it literally. Nietzsche was not reporting a divine obituary. He was not shaking his fist at the sky while listening to angry violin solos. No, what he was describing was something far stranger and far more human. He was talking about belief, or rather, what happens when belief collapses. Let us slow this down. The phrase, "God is dead," comes from Nietzsche's book, The Gay Science, published in 1882. In it, a madman runs into a town square shouting that God is dead, that we have killed him, and that we are wandering through the darkness without a compass. The townspeople laugh. They do not understand. They are not ready. But the madman sees the future. He is not angry. He is terrified. So what does it mean? Nietzsche was observing a shift in culture. Science was rising. Religion was retreating. People no longer saw the world as governed by a divine being. The structures that had provided meaning, heaven, morality, commandments, eternal purpose, were beginning to crumble. It was not an act of rebellion. It was an accident of progress, a slow erosion rather than a sudden revolt. But the effect was the same. The foundation cracked. And here comes the paradox. If belief in God once gave life meaning, then what happens when that belief disappears? Are we freer? Are we lost? Are we both at the same time? Nietzsche feared that without God, society would drift into nihilism. The belief that life has no meaning, values are arbitrary, and everything is a floating shrug in the cosmic void. Not because God literally died, but because belief in God no longer held the same weight. And when that belief vanishes, it takes its scaffolding with it. It is like pulling out a central beam in a house and pretending the roof will hold anyway. You might say, "But I still believe in something." That is fine. Nietzsche was not writing for you personally. He was speaking to a broader shift, a culture moving away from inherited faith and towards something else, something unknown. And that is the heart of the existential tension. When the old meaning disappears, nothing immediately replaces it. You do not stop believing in God and suddenly start believing in biodegradable toothbrushes or cryptocurrency. The meaning gap is real. And in that gap, there is anxiety. freedom, panic, possibility, the great spiritual version of standing in the cereal aisle for 45 minutes trying to decide between fiber and flavor. Nietzsche saw this gap as dangerous, but also necessary. He did not say God is dead and throw a party. He said God is dead and asked, what now? If we are no longer handed meaning from above, we have to create it ourselves. This is not easy. It is like writing your own script with no genre, no outline, and no guarantee that anyone will clap at the end. But it is also empowering, because if nothing is predetermined, then everything is possible. Nietzsche did not stop at the death of God. He offered a response. The concept of the Übermensch, often translated as the Overman or Superman, not the cape-wearing type. This is not about flying or laser eyes. This is about someone who invents values, who lives creatively, who does not follow inherited systems but builds their own. The Übermensch is the person who says, there is no given meaning, so I will make meaning. They are not waiting for instructions. They are painting the map while walking the road. But that road is not easy. Because before you become the Übermensch, you go through what Nietzsche called the death of illusions. The moment when everything you believed was solid turns to sand. The comforting stories vanish. The childhood answers dissolve. It is not a celebration. It is a mourning. God is dead is not the end of belief. It is the beginning of grief. And grief, as we know, comes in stages. Some people deny it. Others bargain. Some rage. Some laugh awkwardly and say, well, at least we have brunch. But deep down, they feel it. The absence, the silence, the uneasy space where meaning used to live. This is not limited to religion. It applies to any central belief system. Capitalism, fame, romantic love, national identity, even reason itself. When the thing you thought gave life purpose disappears, you feel it in your bones. You ask questions like, what is good? What is worth doing? Who am I really? And the answers are no longer handed to you in a neat package with footnotes and sacred fonts. You have to dig, invent, experiment, fail, begin again. That is what Nietzsche meant. Not that life is meaningless, but that meaning is no longer guaranteed. And that is the paradox. The death of God removes the structure, but also offers a blank canvas. You are no longer confined, but you are also no longer protected. It is terrifying, but it is also honest. The burden of freedom can feel heavier than the comfort of chains. But it is real, and it belongs to you. Think of it this way. Religion gave many people a lighthouse. Nietzsche blew up the lighthouse and handed everyone flashlights with dying batteries and said, good luck out there. But he also believed that the light could grow brighter, that we could learn to guide ourselves, that a new dawn was possible, one born not from tradition, but from courage. And that courage begins with accepting that meaning is not out there waiting to be discovered. It is built like a campfire in the cold. Carefully, patiently, with whatever you have. So what now? Now you get to choose. Not with reckless abandon, but with care, with thought, with the quiet understanding that your choices matter, not because the universe cares, but because you do. You decide what is sacred. You decide what is beautiful. You decide what is worth your time, your effort, your laughter, your tears. You are not God, but you are not nothing either. You are the creator of meaning in your own life, and that is a weight worth lifting, because even if God is dead, wonder is not, love is not, curiosity is not. You can still marvel at stars, weep at music, find purpose in friendships, and giggle at cats wearing tiny hats. That is enough, maybe more than enough. So the next time someone says, God is dead, you can reply, then it is time to live. And now, as we close the philosophical curtain on this existential drama, I will leave you with one final question. If God is dead, does that mean someone else has to answer customer service emails now? Being and nothingness. the existential tug-of-war between something and absolutely nothing. You are standing in front of the fridge again. The light hums. You are not hungry. You are not sure what you are looking for. You just opened it out of habit. A cool breeze hits your face. A slice of cheese blinks at you from a lonely shelf. Suddenly, a strange thought creeps in. What am I even doing? Welcome to the philosophical funhouse that is being and nothingness. No, it is not a band name. And no, it is not the name of your unfinished poetry collection. It is a foundational idea from the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, who had a habit of writing things that make your brain feel like it is trying to fold a fitted sheet. Let us begin gently. Sartre's Being and Nothingness, published in 1943, is a giant philosophical doorstop of a book that explores what it means to exist. Not just to be alive, but to be, to show up, to take up space, to navigate the strange soup of consciousness without any pre-written script. At its core, Sartre offers us a deliciously uncomfortable paradox. You are free. Completely. Radically. Terrifyingly free. And because of that, nothing has meaning unless you choose to give it meaning. That is right. No cosmic instructions. No hidden scrolls. Just you, a universe, and a blank page that keeps asking you, so what now? Sartre divides the world into two basic categories: being in itself and being for itself. Being in itself is the world of objects, rocks, chairs, sandwiches. These things exist. They just are. They do not ask questions. They do not doubt themselves. A chair never wonders if it is living up to its potential. A sandwich never has an identity crisis. Being for itself, on the other hand, is the world of consciousness. That is you, me. Anyone who can think about the fact that they are thinking. Human beings are not just what they are. They are also what they are not yet. They are potential, possibility, becoming. And that is where the tension begins. To be human, according to Sartre, is to be a constant negotiation between what is and what is not, between your present reality and the future you imagine, between your current self and the person you are trying to become. You are a walking contradiction. You are what you are. But you are also what you are not yet. You are a construction site with legs. This brings us to the central tension in being and nothingness. The idea that nothingness is part of what makes you, you. Nothingness is not just a spooky word whispered in haunted houses. In Sartre's world, it is an active force in human consciousness. It is what allows you to reflect, to doubt, to imagine other possibilities. Let us say you are a barista. That is your job. You make lattes. You smile politely at customers who think foam art is a personality trait. But you are not only a barista. You might dream of being a writer, or a stand-up comedian, or someone who owns 17 dogs and lives on a houseboat. That space between who you are and who you could be, that gap, is nothingness. It is the fuel of your freedom. Sartre calls this gap negation, the ability to say, I am not this. It is what lets you quit your job, change your habits, end a relationship, start a band, dye your hair, or say, I do not want to be this kind of person anymore. You are not defined by what you have been. You are defined by the space between what you are and what you might become. But here comes the existential whiplash. This freedom? It is not always fun. Freedom sounds great in motivational posters. But real freedom, the kind Sartre talks about, is overwhelming. It means you are responsible for everything. Your choices, your actions, your identity, your regrets, your weird haircut in 2012. There is no script, no one to blame, no backup plan. Just you and the terrifying realization that even doing nothing is a choice. Sartre calls this the burden of freedom, the weight of having no excuses. This leads to a phenomenon he calls bad faith. Bad faith is when you lie to yourself. Not out loud, but quietly, in the privacy of your soul. You pretend you are not free. You convince yourself that you are just a role, a label, a job title, a victim of circumstance. The classic example? The waiter who behaves too much like a waiter. Polished, mechanical, all smiles and scripted lines. Sartre says this person is performing a role so fully that they forget they are more than that role. They reduce themselves to a function. You might do this too. You might say, I cannot change. This is just who I am. Or I have no choice, I am stuck. That is bad faith. You are denying your own freedom because freedom is scary. But the truth, according to Sartre, is that you are never just one thing. You are always becoming. That is beautiful and exhausting. Because if nothing defines you but your actions, then every moment is a chance to reinvent yourself and a risk of becoming something you do not like. And that brings us back to the paradox. You are a being who contains nothingness. You are a thing that is constantly escaping itself. You are always more than what you are now and never quite what you were 5 minutes ago. You are both being and nothingness, all at once. You are the person standing in front of the fridge, unsure if you are looking for a snack or for clarity. You are the awkward silence at a dinner party that suddenly becomes profound. You are the joke that becomes a career, the failure that becomes a new beginning, the empty calendar that becomes a life. You are, as Sartre might say, condemned to be free. That sounds harsh, but it is also hopeful. Because if you are not bound by essence, if you are not locked into a single identity, then you are capable of change, of growth, of becoming someone new, not once, not twice, but as many times as it takes. That is terrifying, but it is also power. Sartre does not give you easy answers. He does not offer comfort. He offers responsibility. He says, here is your freedom. Use it. Own it. Mess it up. Try again. And that might be the most human thing of all. To know that you are not finished, that you are always in process, that your story is not a straight line but a weird, tangled scribble with coffee stains and unexpected twists. So if you are ever staring at the ceiling wondering who you are, what you are doing, and whether you should have gone to clown school instead of majoring in business, congratulations. You are alive. You are choosing. You are being and nothingness in a hoodie. And now, as we close this philosophical dance between existence and the void, I will leave you with one final question. If you are nothing, then who keeps leaving dishes in the sink? Eternal torment of samsara. Life is a wheel, and you are the squeaky spot. You wake up, your alarm is screaming, you blink, you sit up, you reach for your phone, you scroll through an app that drains your soul in 5 minutes or less, then you brush your teeth, put on clothes that feel like a compromise, and stumble into another day that looks suspiciously like yesterday. And just like that, you have entered samsara. Again. Samsara is not just a pretty Sanskrit word you once saw on a yoga studio wall next to a questionable smoothie bar. It is one of the most ancient, layered, and emotionally exhausting ideas in Eastern philosophy. It translates roughly to wandering or cyclic existence. But what it really means is this: you are trapped in the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, and it is exhausting. Let us break it down like an existential omelet. In Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and other Indian philosophical traditions, samsara refers to the never-ending cycle of life. You are born, you suffer, you die, and then, just when you thought it was over, you come back, again, in a new body, with new problems, and no memory of the last disaster, over and over and over again. This is not a cosmic vacation. It is not reincarnation as a reward. It is not, you were good, now enjoy life as a butterfly. No. Samsara is not your spiritual Airbnb. It is your cosmic lease renewal with no exit clause. It is not hell exactly. But it is a kind of torment, especially when you begin to understand why you are stuck. The core idea is that you are trapped in samsara because of your attachments, your cravings, your illusions, your belief that this world, this body, this ego, this desire for extra fries is the real thing. And because of that, you suffer. In Buddhist thought, this is summed up in the Four Noble Truths, which basically say, 1. Life is suffering. 2. Suffering is caused by desire. 3. There is a way to end desire. 4. That way involves a lot of sitting quietly and trying not to be a disaster. So samsara is not just the physical world. It is a state of mind, a way of seeing life through the lens of clinging and resisting. You want things to be different, so you struggle. You want things to stay the same, so you suffer. You want everyone to stop emailing you, and they do not. That is samsara. The cycle continues until you reach moksha in Hinduism or nirvana in Buddhism, which are basically the same neighborhood, spiritually speaking. Both mean liberation, freedom from the cycle, release from the endless rebirth treadmill that keeps throwing you back into lives like an overenthusiastic metaphysical recycling bin. But here's the paradox. If samsara is suffering, why do people keep clinging to it? Because even in its misery, it feels familiar. The cycle gives you stories, drama, identity. You get to be someone. You get to fall in love. You get to binge-watch streaming series and argue about pineapple on pizza. You get to cry when things break and laugh when someone falls down, but is probably fine. You get to feel. And sometimes, you mistake those feelings for meaning. You think, this relationship matters. This ambition matters. This version of myself who wears glasses and reads at cafes matters. And they do matter until they vanish, which they always do. And then you suffer again. Because you forgot that nothing in samsara lasts, not even your obsession with kitchen gadgets. That is the torment, not the pain itself, but the endless loop of hope and loss, the craving for permanence in a world that dissolves like sugar in tea. Let us bring it closer to home. You get a promotion, you are thrilled. For a week, then it feels normal. Then you want more. Then you burn out. Then you go on vacation. Then you return. Then you hate everyone. That is samsara. You find love. It is magical. It becomes routine. It becomes work. It becomes confusing. You wonder if you are broken. Then you break up. Then you meet someone else. Repeat. That is samsara. Even spiritual seeking can become part of the cycle. You meditate. You chant. You buy a cushion. You post a photo of your cushion. You wonder if you are enlightened yet. You are not. You become frustrated. You seek more. Still, samsara. The trap is not just desire. It is ignorance. The belief that your ego is real and stable. That there is a permanent self to defend, promote, and dress up in matching accessories. But the self, according to Eastern philosophy, is not fixed. It is more like a weather pattern, temporary, reactive, constantly changing. You are not the same person you were yesterday. You are a process pretending to be a person. That is not an insult. That is insight. Because once you see the illusion, you begin to step outside the cycle. That is where detachment comes in. Not apathy, not boredom, but a gentle release. A way of saying, I see this moment. I appreciate it. But I do not need to cling to it. You are not trying to escape the world. You are trying to stop mistaking it for something it is not. You can still enjoy things. You can still love people. You can still laugh at ducks. But you stop expecting those things to save you. You stop assigning them the job of making you whole. And slowly, the wheel starts to slow down. You begin to act not out of craving, but out of clarity. You choose kindness, not because you want good karma points, but because it makes the cycle smoother while you are still in it. You sit with discomfort without demanding it go away. You stop chasing things that vanish when you catch them. You do not have to be a monk. You do not have to move to a cave. You just have to notice. That is the hidden grace of samsara. Once you see the loop, you are no longer running in circles. You are watching the circle from the center. And from there, the torment becomes bearable, maybe even beautiful. Because now you are not trapped. You are learning. You are observing. You are practicing the strange art of letting go while still holding life gently in your hands. You are still human. You will still forget. You will still get annoyed at traffic. You will still crave recognition and validation and a new blender. That is fine. The point is not to be perfect. The point is to be aware. Samsara is a prison made of illusions, but the door has always been unlocked. You just have to see it and step through it, or at the very least stop decorating your cell. And now, as we release this spinning wheel of cosmic repetition back into the abyss from which it came, I will leave you with one final question. If life is a cycle, who keeps forgetting to put air in the tires? The shadow, that quiet, creepy part of you that knows too much. You are walking down the street. The sun is shining. The breeze is perfect. Life feels almost poetic. Then a dog barks, and you imagine kicking it. You do not want to. You love dogs. You would never. But for one horrifying second, the thought is there. Floating, uninvited, terrible. That is your shadow saying hello. Do not worry. You are not a monster. You are just human. And humans come with shadows. Not just the ones cast by streetlights, but the kind that live inside. The mental clutter room where all the parts you do not like get stuffed and locked away with old memories and questionable fashion choices. The term, the shadow, comes from Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, who decided that everyone has a psychological basement. And in that basement, all the bits of yourself you pretend do not exist are down there throwing a loud, awkward party. Let us unpack it, gently, of course. The shadow is the part of your unconscious mind that holds everything you do not want to acknowledge about yourself. Not just the embarrassing stuff, but also the dangerous, the impulsive, the shameful, the uncool. Rage, envy, lust, cruelty, weird obsessions with true crime documentaries. It is all in there, but it does not just include your dark urges. Sometimes your shadow hides positive traits too. Your power, your confidence, your creativity, especially if those things were discouraged when you were younger. The shadow is not evil, it is exiled. Jung believed that the more you deny this part of yourself, the more it grows in the dark, like mold, or regret, or unread emails. You try to be kind, good, rational, polite, and that is lovely. But every time you suppress something about yourself to fit in, or stay safe, or avoid judgment, it does not disappear. It just moves, below, where it waits. And then one day, it bursts out at the worst possible moment. You snap at someone you love. You sabotage a good thing. You say something cruel and wonder, where did that come from? It came from the shadow. The paradox is this: you cannot be whole until you make peace with what you have tried to forget. And that is hard. Because the shadow is, by definition, not something you want to look at. It is uncomfortable. It is raw. It has a weird laugh and questionable taste in metaphors. But here is the twist. Your shadow is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to complete you. The things you reject about yourself still live inside you. They want a voice, not control. Just acknowledgement. And if you do not give them that, they find other ways to speak. This is where things get weird. Jung said that the shadow often shows up in projection. That means the traits you deny in yourself are the same ones you notice, loudly, in other people. You hate arrogance in others because you have arrogance in yourself you are not ready to claim. You mock vulnerability in others because you are afraid of your own tenderness. You judge someone's choices because deep down, you envy their freedom. Projection is like psychic mirror fog. You think you are looking at someone else, but really you are staring into your own shadow wearing someone else's face. The shadow can also appear in dreams. Symbolically, of course. You are not going to see yourself dressed as a villain monologuing in a thunderstorm, but you might dream of strangers doing things you secretly want, or fear you could do. You might wake up confused. That is normal. Dreams are shadow playgrounds. Sometimes your shadow slips into humor. You joke about things that make you nervous. You laugh at what you are afraid to say out loud. That is the shadow knocking on your front door, wearing a clown nose. Even creativity can be a shadow outlet. Artists, writers, musicians, all of them dip into their shadows, the stories that haunt them, the feelings they cannot explain. the truths they are scared to say out loud. Because the shadow is not just darkness, it is potential. The energy you use to repress the shadow could be energy used to fuel your work, your relationships, your sense of aliveness. But you have to face it first. This process is called shadow integration. It does not mean giving in to every dark thought you have ever had. It means getting curious, noticing your triggers, asking why that comment made you angry, why that compliment felt uncomfortable, why you judge that person before they even spoke. It means saying, that part of me exists. I see it. I do not have to act on it, but I will not deny it. You begin to understand that your shadow is not separate from you. It is part of you. Just like a knot in your back or a song stuck in your head. It needs attention, not punishment. But do not mistake this for easy work. Shadow integration is not a weekend project. It is a lifelong process of self-honesty. It is messy. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it feels like going through your old social media posts from 2009. But it is worth it, because once you stop running from your shadow, it stops chasing you. You become less reactive, less judgmental, less afraid. You see your whole self, not just the curated highlight reel. And in that honesty, there is peace. You stop pretending. You start breathing. You stop attacking others for traits you secretly carry. You begin to forgive yourself for being human, for being imperfect, for being both light and dark and deeply confused most of the time. And that is where growth begins. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It says, here is what you have been avoiding. Here is what hurts. Here is what you need to heal. And healing is not about becoming someone new. It is about welcoming the parts of you that you left behind. You do not get to wholeness by slicing yourself in half. You get there by turning toward the shadow, not to glorify it, not to indulge it, but to understand it. To say, I know you are here, and I am listening. Because once you integrate the shadow, you stop being ruled by it. You become someone who acts, not reacts. You become someone who chooses, not avoids. You become someone who is not afraid to sit in the dark, because you have learned how to carry your own light. And now, as we turn off the flashlight and walk back up from the basement of the mind, I will leave you with one final question. If your shadow contains your deepest truths, is that why it keeps stealing your snacks? Misanthropy, when humanity feels like the real apocalypse. You are at the grocery store. A child is screaming. Someone is talking loudly on speakerphone about their recent toe surgery. The person in front of you has 37 coupons and a strong opinion about raisins. You clutch your basket. You stare at the floor. And somewhere inside your soul, a small whisper mutters, I do not like people. Congratulations, you have met misanthropy. Misanthropy is not just introversion or shyness or being a little socially allergic after too many meetings. No, misanthropy is something deeper. It is a fundamental suspicion of the human species, a philosophical grumble, a slow-burning eye roll directed at civilization itself. Let us define it simply. Misanthropy is the belief that humans, as a group, are disappointing at best and catastrophic at worst. It is not personal. Misanthropes can like individuals. They might have friends, family, a dog named Carl. But step back, zoom out, and they see humanity as a species that just cannot be trusted with sharp objects, social media, or global ecosystems. And strangely enough, they might have a point. Let us explore the long, grumbling history of misanthropy. Philosophers have been side-eyeing humanity for centuries. Diogenes, the ancient Greek cynic, famously lived in a barrel and once wandered around Athens with a lantern in broad daylight, claiming to be looking for an honest man. Spoiler alert, he never found one. Then came Schopenhauer, who described humanity as fundamentally selfish, irrational, and kind of annoying. If people were puppies, Schopenhauer would be the guy saying, this one bites, that one drools. I would rather read a book. Even Mark Twain, usually known for his humor, once wrote, I have no special regard for Satan, but I can at least claim that I have never created man. So misanthropy is not new, it is just more relevant now that we have comment sections and self-checkout machines. But here is the paradox. Humans are social animals. We need each other. We crave connection. We form societies, cities, book clubs, karaoke groups. We are built to be together. And yet, at the same time, we can barely tolerate each other. We interrupt. We lie. We hoard resources. We invent fashion trends that no one asked for. We gossip, cheat, cut each other off in traffic, and design pop-up ads that chase you across the internet like needy ghosts. Misanthropy is the tension between knowing you are part of a species and secretly wishing you were not. It is that feeling when someone takes up both armrests on an airplane, when someone leaves their shopping cart in the middle of the parking lot, when someone asks if you have a minute, and then takes an hour to explain something that could have been a drawing of a sandwich. But misanthropy is not just frustration, it is also philosophical. Misanthropes often believe that the flaws in humanity are not just surface level, but structural. That our tendency toward war, greed, cruelty, and pettiness is not a bug, it is the default setting. This can lead to pessimism. The idea that no amount of reform or progress will fix the fundamental glitch in the human operating system. That no matter how advanced our technology becomes, we will still find a way to use it for selfies, surveillance, and starting arguments with strangers about fonts. But misanthropy is not always hostile. Sometimes it is sad. Sometimes it comes from disappointment, from loving the idea of humanity and being heartbroken by the reality. You see potential, kindness, creativity, empathy, and then you scroll through the news and see cruelty, corruption, chaos, and a guy who insists that the moon is fake because he read it in a meme once. That contrast creates grief. Misanthropy, at its core, is often a mourning process. Mourning what humans could be. Mourning the gap between our ideals and our behavior. And ironically, that grief suggests hope. Because you would not be disappointed if you did not care. The paradox deepens. Many misanthropes still act ethically. They still recycle. They still volunteer. They still help lost tourists and wave at neighbors and pet other people's dogs. They might mutter, humans are the worst under their breath, but they still hold the elevator. That is because misanthropy is often selective. It targets systems more than individuals. The cruelty of crowds, the madness of mobs, the horrors of history. You might dislike humanity, but still love your grandmother. You might distrust people in general, but still believe that kindness is possible in small doses, like emotional vitamins. And that brings us to the idea of compassionate misanthropy. Yes, it exists. This is the strange, bittersweet version where you see all the flaws, all the failures, all the fragile egos and misplaced rage, and still choose to be kind. Not because people deserve it necessarily, but because it is how you choose to be. You do not believe the world will get better, but you try anyway. Because apathy is boring. Because cruelty is lazy. Because your soul feels cleaner when you act with decency, even if no one else does. That is not weakness, that is strength. And perhaps the misanthrope's real power is this: honesty without hate. To say, yes, people are messy and selfish and loud, and often wrong about basic facts. But they are also capable of art, of music, of courage, of holding a stranger's hand in the dark. You do not have to pretend people are perfect, but you can choose not to become bitter. You can laugh at the absurdity, shake your head, take breaks from the noise, and still return to the world with your sanity intact. Because even misanthropes need love. Even loners crave meaning. Even skeptics hope. It is just quieter, more cautious, wrapped in sarcasm and good playlists. So if you ever find yourself looking at the world and feeling like a disappointed parent watching toddlers crash a wedding, remember this: you are not alone. There are others who feel the same, who rage at the headlines and sigh at the small talk and wonder if humanity is a cosmic prank. But they are still here, still trying, still choosing to believe that kindness, while rare, is worth practicing, even if most people are exhausting. And now, as we gently release humanity back into the wild to do whatever it does next, I will leave you with one final question. If you hate people so much, why do you keep reading the comments? Human sacrifice mythos, when offering Bob to the volcano, seemed totally reasonable. You are sitting at your desk, emails are piling up, your manager is asking for deliverables, your coffee is cold, a strange thought passes through your mind. Would productivity improve if someone were tossed into a volcano? Do not panic, you are not alone. Welcome to the bizarre, ancient, unsettling world of human sacrifice. No, this is not about horror movies or creepy cults that wear matching robes and chant in poorly ventilated caves. This is about something deeper, stranger, and somehow very human. The belief that giving up a life, an actual person, could restore balance, secure favor from the gods, or fix whatever had gone terribly wrong. Let us step gently into this fire pit of history and psychology. The mythos of human sacrifice is older than most of your favorite conspiracy theories. It shows up in ancient Egypt, in the Aztec Empire, among the Celts, and across early Mesopotamian cultures. It was not always grim or deranged. Often, it was seen as a noble act, a necessary payment, a sacred exchange, a life for a harvest, a heart for the sun, a king for the rain. The logic went like this. The gods are powerful, moody beings. They control everything from crops to whether or not your child survives the flu. And because life is unpredictable, painful, and full of chaos, it made sense to try to appease these unseen forces. And what better gift could you offer than life itself? That is where the paradox begins. Human sacrifice is both unthinkable and completely rational. Rational in the context of ancient belief systems. Rational when you think about survival. Rational when your village is starving, your leaders are desperate, and someone suggests that maybe, just maybe, the gods want Steve. But it is also deeply unsettling. It challenges every modern idea about morality, dignity, and basic respect for life. You hear human sacrifice and think of primitive brutality. But to ancient people it was meaningful, sacred, structured, sometimes even beautiful. A gift, not a punishment. A ceremony, not a crime. Some societies believed the sacrificed individual would be honored in the afterlife. Others thought the soul would be reborn into a better existence. And sometimes, the person chosen was not a criminal or outcast. They were beloved. Sometimes they were leaders, priests, even volunteers. Because in many mythologies, sacrifice was heroic. That sounds strange today. But in a world without antibiotics, without electricity, without weather apps or social safety nets, the stakes were very real. Droughts killed, floods destroyed. Famines swept entire regions into the dust. The gods were not symbols. They were survival. So giving a life to preserve life? That was not cruelty. That was logic. And here is the twist. We have not entirely left that mindset behind. Modern society may not offer up virgins to volcanoes anymore, at least not officially, but we still sacrifice people in more subtle ways. Think about war. We send people, often young, often idealistic, into conflict for ideas, borders, oil, justice, revenge, or peace. We honor their deaths with flags, speeches, and solemn parades. Is that not a kind of ritual? Think about capitalism. Some individuals work themselves into illness for profit margins they never see. Others live in scarcity so that a few can thrive. Is that not, in some twisted form, a sacrifice of bodies for systems? Think about fame. Public figures are elevated, adored, and then devoured by media and opinion. We love their rise. We feast on their fall. They become symbols more than people, offerings to our hunger for spectacle. Think about healthcare. Who gets saved? Who gets access? Whose life is deemed valuable enough to fund? These are sacrificial calculations, quiet, bureaucratic, deeply moral. We tell ourselves we are enlightened now, that human life is sacred. But we still participate in systems where some people are seen as expendable, not to volcanoes but to profits, politics, and convenience. And that is where the human sacrifice mythos reveals its uncomfortable truth. It is not just about ancient rituals. It is about the logic of trade-offs. The belief that pain can be useful, that death can be strategic, that suffering can be justified if it serves a higher purpose. You see it in stories too. Heroes die to save the world. Parents sacrifice their dreams for their children. One character stays behind on the spaceship so the others can escape. These are sacrifices that feel noble, beautiful, necessary. We cheer, we cry, we believe. Because the mythos has evolved. It no longer wears feathers and blood. Now it wears drama and tragedy. But the structure is the same. Loss for gain, one for many, suffering as payment. Even religion still echoes it. In Christianity, the crucifixion of Jesus is described as the ultimate sacrifice, a divine being offering himself to redeem others. That idea has shaped cultures for 2,000 years. The mythos of human sacrifice is not dead. It just changed clothes. So what do we do with this? How do we hold the idea that humans once threw people into pits and now throw them into debt, conflict, and burnout? How do we honor the past without repeating it? Perhaps the answer is not to reject sacrifice altogether, but to redefine it. Because not all sacrifice is violent. Not all trade-offs are cruel. A parent sacrifices sleep for their child. A friend gives time to support someone in grief. A stranger donates blood, or bone marrow, or a kidney. These are not myths. These are real. The difference is consent, intention, empathy. The old mythos was about appeasing the gods. The new one can be about uplifting each other, not sacrifice to avoid wrath, but sacrifice to offer love. And maybe that is what we carry forward. Not the blood, not the altar, not the terror, but the idea that what we give matters. That choosing to give, freely, consciously, with compassion, is one of the most human things we can do. It makes us more than survivors. It makes us givers, creators, connectors. The mythos of human sacrifice may be ancient, but its heart still beats in every story of courage, service, and grace. Just maybe, without the volcanoes. And now, as we blow out the ceremonial candles and gently return our metaphors to their shelves, I will leave you with one final question. If human sacrifice used to please the gods, does that mean returning your shopping cart also counts? Death drive, Freud's grim theory, that you secretly want to crash the car. You are walking along a perfectly calm street. The sun is out. Your coffee is warm. Then, without warning, your brain whispers, "What if I just walked into traffic?" You do not want to die. You are not depressed. You are mostly fine. But the thought was there, like a pop-up ad from the dark corners of your subconscious. That is the death drive saying hello. Let us begin with an awkward Austrian man named Sigmund Freud. He is the godfather of psychoanalysis, the inventor of couch therapy, and the reason why everyone blames their parents for everything. Most people know him for things like the Oedipus complex, or his obsession with dreams, or that one time he said cigars are just cigars, except when they are not. But in 1920, Freud introduced a new concept that was darker, weirder, and slightly terrifying. The death drive, or as he called it, thanatos. He believed that humans are not just driven by desire, pleasure, and survival, what he called the life drive, or eros, but also by an opposing force that pulls us towards self-destruction, chaos, and even death. Let us pause there. Freud said that deep inside the human mind, beneath all the ambition, romance, and brunch plans, there is a part of us that wants to end things, not in a dramatic, poetic way, but in a weird, instinctual, pull the plug and be done with it kind of way. That is the death drive. It explains why people engage in risky behavior, why they sabotage relationships, why they destroy what they build, why they press buttons clearly labeled "do not push." Freud believed that the death drive was a fundamental part of the human psyche, a force that seeks to return the body to a state of non-existence. In other words, to return to zero. Now, before you panic and start looking for a helmet and a therapist, let us make one thing clear. The death drive is not about conscious desire. It is not about suicidal intent. It is about a deeper, almost biological pull toward undoing, toward dissolving the self, toward silence and stillness. It is not something you want. It is something you contain. Think of it as the psychic gravity that balances the chaos of life. Life pushes forward, death pulls back. You are suspended between these two forces, like a philosophical game of tug-of-war played inside your nervous system. And that is where the paradox begins. You are built to survive, to grow, to connect, to strive. And yet, buried beneath that drive is the opposite, a silent urge to stop, to unravel, to let go. Freud believed that this internal conflict explained a lot of human behavior. Why people repeat trauma, why societies create wars, why artists destroy their own work, why some people climb success ladders and then jump off. It is not just irrationality, it is Thanatos at work. You can see the death drive in small modern ways too. You binge a show you do not even like. You eat food that makes you feel sick. You text someone you swore you would never text again. You stay in jobs, habits, or relationships that drain the life out of you. You know it is not good for you, but you do it anyway. Freud would say, yes, of course, you are trying to return to the void. He believed that humans carry within them a kind of nostalgia for non-existence, a longing to return to the peaceful inertia before life began. He thought birth itself was a violent rupture. We were forced into consciousness, and part of us has been trying to go back ever since. Now, this might sound dramatic. That is because it is. Freud was not known for subtlety. But there is something strangely relatable about the idea that part of us just wants rest. Not sleep, not a nap, but an existential sigh that says, enough. This idea has been expanded, questioned, and repackaged by later thinkers. Some see the death drive not as a literal desire for death, but as a metaphor for self-sabotage. The internal urge to tear down what you build, to mess things up just when they start going well. You feel uncomfortable with stability. You crave the edge. You drive toward the cliff, even if you never plan to jump. Others say it explains compulsive repetition, the way people recreate patterns of pain, choosing partners who hurt them, repeating failures, rewinding emotional tapes over and over, hoping for a different ending that never arrives. Still others say it is a response to existential fatigue, the weight of having to keep going, keep achieving, keep pretending. The death drive whispers, what if you did not have to? And yet, most people do not listen, because the life drive is still stronger. Eros wants connection, creativity, pleasure, legacy. It wants to build, to hold hands, to make playlists, to learn things, to laugh at ducks. It is the reason you cry at weddings and root for underdogs, and grow herbs on your windowsill even though you always forget to water them. Eros and Thanatos are not enemies, they are siblings, locked in a dance that creates tension, motion, and meaning. You are not just moving forward, you are also circling back. You are not just becoming, you are also undoing. You are creating stories and quietly questioning their endings. And that is where the beauty of the death drive comes in, because it is not just about destruction. It is also about release. It is the part of you that wants to let go of the mask, the role, the weight. It asks, what if you stopped performing? It invites stillness, reflection, surrender. Without Thanatos, you might burn out trying to be immortal, always chasing, always pushing, never resting. The death drive reminds you that endings are natural, that collapse is part of the cycle, that silence is not failure, it is part of the song. Even nature understands this. Leaves fall, stars die, seasons shift. Nothing holds forever. Everything, even joy, dissolves. And that is not bleak. It is what makes life bearable. The death drive, for all its darkness, is also what makes you let go of grudges, of illusions, of identities that no longer fit. It clears the ground. It makes space. It is not your enemy. It is your reset button. So what do you do with this knowledge? You notice the urge to crash the car. You nod at it. You do not act on it. You understand that it is not a signal to die. It is a signal to pause, to exhale, to ask if you are forcing yourself to live in ways that feel hollow. You learn to balance eros and thanatos, drive and drift, building and burning, forward and still. You stop fearing your darkness. You start listening to what it wants to tell you. And maybe, just maybe, you find peace in the paradox. You are alive, yes. But part of you remembers the silence before life, and part of you longs to return, not now. Not literally, just enough to remind you that rest is sacred. And now, as we gently pull the covers back over Freud's theory and turn down the lights in the unconscious, I will leave you with one final question. If you have a death drive, does that mean your to-do list is technically self-defense? Nihilism. When the universe shrugs and you start doing the same, you are brushing your teeth. The news is on in the background. Something terrible is happening again. You pause. You stare into the mirror. You think, does anything even matter? And somewhere, in the vast philosophical desert of your thoughts, a cold breeze whispers back, no, not really. Welcome to nihilism. It is not just a buzzword tossed around by teenagers in black hoodies or by that one guy at parties who always quotes Nietzsche and eats all the hummus. Nihilism is a serious, complicated, and slightly terrifying philosophical position that suggests life has no inherent meaning, purpose, or value. That is it. That is the whole idea. There is no cosmic plan, no divine scorekeeper, no universal justice. No grand narrative where good triumphs and the credits roll. Just atoms, entropy, and a bunch of people trying to be happy in a world that cannot even decide on pizza toppings. Let us break it down. The word nihilism comes from the Latin nihil, which means nothing. And it lives up to the name. Nihilism is the philosophical position that when you zoom all the way out, past culture, past religion, past social norms, you find nothing solid underneath. No absolute morality. No objective truth. No cosmic to-do list. Just existence. Cold, silent, uncaring. It is the intellectual version of standing in a grocery store and realizing that you have no idea why you came, what you want, or why soup is so expensive. But here is where things get tricky. Nihilism is not just a mood. It is not just feeling down. It is a philosophical stance, a way of understanding the world that says meaning is not something out there waiting to be found. Because meaning, ultimately, does not exist at all. Some people hear that and feel liberated, others spiral. Because here comes the paradox. If life has no meaning, then what is the point of doing anything? Why get out of bed? Why love people? Why vote, floss, or write thank you notes? Why care about your career, or your hobbies, or your lunch? This is called existential nihilism, and it is the darkest version. It says not only is there no meaning in the world, but that attempts to create meaning are illusions. Stories we tell ourselves to distract from the yawning void of pointlessness. That sounds bleak. And it is. But it is also honest, at least according to nihilists. They argue that most meaning is invented. Morality, socially constructed. Religion, a comfort blanket. Success, a popularity contest. Love, a temporary chemical imbalance that makes people do very expensive and irrational things. It is like pulling up the carpet and realizing the floor was never there. One of the most famous faces of nihilism is Friedrich Nietzsche. Though, to be fair, Nietzsche himself was not a full-blown nihilist. He saw nihilism as a crisis, something to move through, not settle into. He warned that once traditional values collapsed, People would face a terrifying vacuum, a moral and emotional collapse, a free fall into meaninglessness. But Nietzsche did not say, "So give up." He said, "So build something better." He wanted people to become creators of value, not to wait for the universe to hand them purpose, but to forge it themselves, like existential blacksmiths. Still, that does not make nihilism go away. You still have to face the truth that, when stripped of belief systems, nothing is inherently meaningful, and that can feel crushing. Like emotional gravity has been turned off and now you are floating, untethered, wondering if breakfast even counts anymore. But here is the twist. Nihilism is not just destructive. It can also be freeing. If nothing matters inherently, then you are free to decide what matters to you. That does not mean making things up blindly. It means choosing your values consciously. Not because they are eternal truths, but because they feel true enough to build a life around. You can still love people. You can still find joy in art, nature, community, and spicy food. You can still write poems, build birdhouses, or start podcasts about 1990s cartoons. Not because these things will save the world, but because they make this moment bearable, beautiful, or at least tolerable. Some people call this optimistic nihilism. It is not about despair. It is about acceptance. It is saying, the universe does not care, so I will. It is a weird kind of rebellion, choosing to live with purpose, even when you know purpose is not built into the software. You become the author of your own story, not because it is grand or important, but because you are the only one holding the pen. This also means letting go of things that never mattered in the first place. You stop chasing approval. You stop fearing failure. You stop comparing yourself to people who wear matching outfits on social media. You realize that most of the rules are made up. Most of the expectations are arbitrary. Most of the deadlines are invented by other confused humans who also have no idea what they are doing. And that is a relief. You do not have to prove anything to the universe. It is not watching. It has never watched. You are free to be kind without being rewarded, to create without being seen, to exist without being measured. That is not emptiness. That is space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to become someone who does not need a cosmic gold star to feel alive. But this kind of freedom is not for everyone. Some people find comfort in structure, in religion, tradition, or fixed morality, and that is fine. The problem arises when those structures collapse, when the beliefs you relied on turn out to be fragile, flawed, or false. That is when nihilism shows up. Not as a choice, but as a reaction, a symptom of loss. You thought there was a plan. Then the plan disappeared. Now you are staring into the dark, wondering if anything was ever real. That is not failure. That is human. Because nihilism is not a destination. It is a phase, a doorway, a place you pass through when the old answers stop working. Some people stay in it forever. Others move on. Some build new philosophies. Others become comedians. A few start gardening. But no one stays untouched. Because once you see the void, you do not forget it. You just learn how to live with it, how to smile at it, how to build a life anyway. So if you ever feel like nothing matters, you are not broken. You are just noticing something that has always been there. And you are allowed to feel overwhelmed. But you are also allowed to keep going, to find small reasons, to invent rituals, to pour meaning into meaningless moments like cream into coffee. Because even if it is all pointless, it does not mean it cannot be beautiful. And now, as we gently close this chapter and wave to the void with a wink and a reusable water bottle, I will leave you with one final question. If nothing matters, can you still blame Mercury retrograde for your bad haircut? Radical skepticism. What if you are wrong about literally everything? You are sipping coffee. You feel confident. The mug is warm. The floor is solid. The sky is blue. Then a strange thought slips into your mind like a raccoon through an open window. How do I know any of this is real? Suddenly your coffee tastes suspicious. The mug might be a simulation. The sky could be a cleverly painted ceiling. And you? You might be dreaming, hallucinating, or just a very polite brain in a jar. This is radical skepticism. It is not a new TikTok trend or a new type of existential crisis. It is one of the oldest, weirdest, and most unsettling ideas in philosophy. And it starts with a single question. How do you know what you know? That is it. That is the whole issue. Radical skepticism is not just doubting this or that. It is doubting everything. Your senses, your memory, your logic, your perception, even your ability to reason about whether you are reasoning correctly. Let us rewind a few thousand years to where the trouble began. In ancient Greece, a group called the skeptics started asking uncomfortable questions. One of them, Pyrrho of Elis, took things very seriously. He doubted whether anything could ever be known for certain. Legend says that he was so committed to not trusting his senses that he had to be followed around by friends to keep him from walking into traffic. Well, chariots. But you get the idea. Centuries later, Descartes came along. Yes, that Descartes. The I think therefore I am guy. He sat in a chair, doubted everything he possibly could, and then built knowledge back up from scratch. He asked, what if an evil demon is deceiving me about everything? That was his version of tech support. Blame a cosmic trickster. And yet, even in his doubt, he found something solid. I am doubting. Therefore, I must exist, at least as something that doubts. That was his anchor. But radical skepticism does not always offer anchors. Sometimes it just tosses you into the ocean and hands you a pair of floaties labeled maybe. The basic idea is this. You could be wrong about absolutely everything. Your memories could be false. Your senses could be distorted. The world could be a simulation run by extremely advanced turtles. Sound dramatic? Sure. But ask yourself, how do you know you are not dreaming right now? You might say, because this feels real. But dreams feel real too. Until you wake up and realize you were in a chicken costume yelling at a vending machine that only accepts compliments. Or maybe you think you know things because you see them. But your eyes can be tricked. Optical illusions, mirages, magic shows. Your senses are not always reliable. Even memory is slippery. You can misremember things. Invent details. Forget major events. Entire court cases have collapsed because someone said, I am pretty sure that is the guy. And it turned out they were pointing at a mop. So, radical skepticism asks, if your tools for knowing are flawed, how can you trust anything you know? Now let us be clear. This is not your everyday doubt. This is not wondering if your pizza delivery will arrive on time. This is full-scale philosophical crisis mode. This is wondering if the world itself is real, or just a very long, very detailed hallucination generated by a brain that forgot where it came from. You might think this sounds like something cooked up by a college student after one too many existential podcasts. But radical skepticism has influenced entire fields: science, logic, theology, and even computer science. It is the ghost in the machine of every big question. How do we know there is an external world? How do we know other minds exist? How do we know the past was real and not just programmed into our memory 5 minutes ago? These are not fun dinner conversation starters, unless you are dining with philosophers or cats. But here comes the twist. Radical skepticism does not say you are wrong. It just says you cannot be sure you are right. It is not claiming the sky is fake. It is claiming you cannot prove the sky is not a projection made by aliens who really like blue. This leads to what some call epistemic humility, a fancy way of saying, maybe I should not be so confident about things I cannot truly verify. Which, honestly, is not a bad attitude. In a world full of people who are very sure they are right about everything, radical skepticism is a helpful reminder that certainty is often an illusion wearing a lab coat and shouting on social media. And yet, this kind of doubt cannot go on forever. Eventually, you have to function. You have to decide whether to cross the street, whether to eat the sandwich, whether to trust the chair you are about to sit on. You cannot double-check reality every 5 minutes without ending up in a padded room with a clipboard and a very patient nurse. So how do you live with radical skepticism without falling into paralysis? You adopt what some philosophers call pragmatic trust. You admit that you do not know everything for sure, but you act as if the world is real. You eat breakfast as if the eggs are not imaginary. You go to work as if money exists and your boss is not a dream fragment. It is like living in a haunted house and saying, "I do not believe in ghosts, but I am still not going in the basement after midnight." That is radical skepticism in daily life, a kind of cautious participation. You know you might be wrong, but you are doing your best anyway. And that is strangely beautiful, because once you stop pretending you know everything, you start paying attention. You start asking better questions. You start seeing the world not as a fixed answer, but as a mystery worth exploring, even if you never find the solution. Skepticism at its best makes you curious, gentle, open-minded, aware of your limitations, humble in your conclusions. At its worst, it makes you a conspiracy theorist yelling at clouds. But we are not going there. Instead, we choose the middle path. Doubt, but do not drown. Question, but do not collapse. Wonder, but also have lunch. You might not know whether reality is real, but you can still laugh. You can still learn. You can still find meaning, not because you proved it exists, but because it helps you stay afloat in the vast, confusing sea of possibility. And now, as we gently close this philosophical inquiry and turn down the volume on your internal courtroom, I will leave you with one final question. If you cannot be certain you exist, do you still have to pay taxes? The silence of God. When you keep asking, and the sky says nothing. You are lying in bed at 3 a.m. The world is quiet. Too quiet. You stare at the ceiling and whisper a question into the dark. Something about meaning, or love, or why everything hurts so much sometimes. You wait. You listen. Nothing happens. And then you wonder, is anyone even up there? That is the silence of God. Not just a theological mystery. Not just something priests wrestle with in empty churches, but a deep, human feeling. That aching sense that the universe has gone radio silent when you needed it most. Let us start with what this really means. The silence of God is not about whether God exists. It is about why he is so quiet if he does. Why, when people cry out in pain, the heavens stay still. Why prayers sometimes feel like voicemails left on a disconnected line. Why, when you are lost, scared, or kneeling on the bathroom floor, there is no reply. This is not new. It has been haunting thinkers, poets, and regular people for thousands of years. In the Bible, even Jesus on the cross cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That is not a metaphor. That is the Son of God feeling ghosted by his Father. Theologians have wrestled with this silence for centuries. Some say God is silent because we are not listening properly. Others say God is always speaking, just in mysterious ways, through nature, art, kindness, or a perfectly timed parking space. Still others say silence is the answer, that silence is sacred, that in silence we grow. But none of that helps much at 3 a.m. when your soul is staring into the void, waiting for something, anything, to talk back. This is where the paradox kicks in. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, why would he be silent at all? Why not speak clearly, loudly, and often? Why not send a sign, a message, a spiritual push notification? Why let people suffer in confusion when a sentence or two would help? It seems cruel, or at least terribly inconvenient. But maybe the problem is not the silence itself. Maybe it is the expectation of sound. People want answers. They want reassurance. They want someone to say, yes, you are on the right path, or no, do not text your ex again. But faith, by its nature, is about moving without certainty. If God spoke clearly all the time, it would not be faith. It would be compliance. Belief would become obedience. Trust would become reaction. There would be no mystery, no seeking, no growth, just rules and consequences. cosmic bureaucracy. So maybe the silence is part of the point. Maybe silence is what creates the space for freedom. Because silence forces you to make your own choices, to decide what kind of person you want to be, to ask again and again, what matters to me, even when I am not being watched. Silence is not just absence, it is invitation. An invitation to take responsibility, to move without a map, to become someone who does good, not because the skies split open and gave you a gold star, but because goodness matters to you anyway. That kind of goodness is rare, and powerful, and real. Still, let us not pretend this makes silence easy. It does not. People are wired for response. When a baby cries, it expects a parent. When you speak, you expect an echo. When you reach out, you hope something will reach back. But sometimes, life gives you silence. And in that silence, people feel abandoned. This is especially true in suffering. When someone is grieving, when war breaks out, when children starve, when injustice reigns, people ask, "Where is God?" And often they get no answer. This is not just a theological problem. It is an emotional wound. People do not want proof. They want presence. They want to feel held, understood, seen. Not just by other people, but by something larger, something eternal, something that says, "You are not alone." And when that something is silent, people break. They break in churches, in bedrooms, in hospital waiting rooms. They say, "If God is real, why is he so quiet while I am screaming?" Some lose faith, others double down. Some invent new ideas of God, ones that suffer with us, or sit beside us in the dark, or cry too. And maybe that is part of the answer. Maybe silence is not absence. Maybe silence is companionship without words. After all, not all silence is empty. Think of someone holding your hand during a panic attack. Think of a friend sitting beside you after bad news. Think of a parent standing in the doorway just making sure you are still breathing. Those silences are full, heavy, comforting. Maybe divine silence is like that. A kind of quiet presence. Not fixing things, not explaining things. Just being there, in ways you do not always recognize. But the problem is, you want something you can point to. You want burning bushes, talking clouds, celestial DMs. Something that says, "You are not imagining this. There is something bigger. You are not crazy. You are not alone." And when that does not happen, the silence gets louder. That is where existentialism and theology crash into each other like two distracted cyclists. One says, "You are alone, so choose meaning." The other says, "You are not alone, but you may never hear from the one who is with you." It is messy. It is heartbreaking. It is very human. But maybe that is the miracle. That people keep searching anyway. That they keep hoping. That they keep praying, even when the answers do not come. That in the face of silence, they still reach out, still build temples, still light candles, still whisper, "Thank you," to the stars. That kind of hope is irrational and beautiful. It says something about the human spirit, that it does not need certainty to believe, that it does not need replies to keep talking, that it can endure silence without giving up on the conversation. So what do you do with divine silence? You listen harder, you act better. You stop waiting for someone else to fix things and become someone who brings light to other people. Darkness. You become the echo you wanted to hear, not because you know God is listening, but because you are. And maybe in doing so, you find something sacred, not in thunderclaps or visions, but in the quiet miracle of choosing love anyway, choosing kindness anyway, choosing to stay even when the sky stays quiet. That is not weakness. That is faith of the fiercest kind. And now, as we gently close this chapter and step back into the silence that birthed the stars, I will leave you with one final question. If God is silent, does that mean he is just really tired of group chats? Antinatalism. When the most ethical option might be not being born at all. You are scrolling through your phone when you see another birth announcement. A smiling baby, proud parents, tiny socks. People comment with hearts and emojis. And somewhere deep inside your brain, a quiet, inconvenient thought floats up like a balloon filled with dread. Should that have happened? Welcome to Antinatalism. It is not a dietary choice. It is not a cult. It is a serious philosophical position with an awkward name and a very simple, very uncomfortable idea. It is wrong to bring new people into existence. Yes, really. Antinatalists believe that creating new life, having children, is not just neutral or risky or difficult. It is morally wrong, and not because they dislike children. Most antinatalists are not grumpy cave dwellers muttering about diaper prices. They are thoughtful, sometimes even kind people who believe that existence itself is the problem. Let us unpack it gently, with tea, and maybe a weighted blanket. Antinatalism is built on a basic assumption. To exist is to suffer. Even a good life contains pain. Hunger, loneliness, disease, disappointment, mosquitoes, existential dread, printer errors, 1-star reviews on things you worked very hard on. Now imagine giving that entire package of misery to someone who did not ask for it. Someone who could not consent. Someone who did not exist before you made a choice for them. That is the antinatalist view. Bringing a child into the world exposes them to harm, without their permission. And once they are here, they are stuck. They have to navigate whatever chaos they are born into. Maybe they get lucky. Maybe they do not. But they never had a say. The most famous modern antinatalist is David Benatar, a South African philosopher who wrote a book with the cheerful title, Better Never to Have Been. In it, he argues that coming into existence is always a harm, even in the best-case scenario. His logic goes like this. The presence of pain is bad. The presence of pleasure is good. But the absence of pain, when there is no person to miss it, is good. And the absence of pleasure, when no one exists to be deprived of it, is not bad. So if you never exist, you avoid pain without missing out on pleasure, which, according to Benatar, makes non-existence a kind of moral win. It is a strange argument, but it has structure. It treats life not as a gift, but as a gamble, and says that no one should be forced to roll those dice on someone else's behalf. This brings us to the central paradox of antinatalism. Most people believe life is good, but we still shield our children from most of it. We protect them. We censor bad news. We worry. We tell bedtime stories with safe endings. Why? Because we know that life is hard. We know that being alive comes with bills, heartbreak, rejection, and the soul-crushing sound of your alarm clock. Yet we still say, I want to bring a new person into this. Antinatalists ask, why? Some say it is selfish, that people have children to satisfy their own needs, to feel fulfilled, to pass on their genes, to conform to cultural pressure. But none of those reasons involve the actual child, who will have to carry the consequences forever. Others say having children is natural, biological, evolutionary. Antinatalists reply that so is cancer, so is decay. Nature is not always a moral guide. Then there is the common defense. But life has joy, it has love, it has beauty, and that is true. But antinatalists argue that joy does not cancel suffering, that a moment of laughter does not erase a lifetime of pain, that a great song does not make up for famine. They say, if someone does not exist, they are not missing anything, but if they do exist, they might suffer. Why take that risk? Now, before you call your parents and demand answers, let us clarify something. Antinatalism is not anti-life. It is not suicidal. It is not advocating harm. In fact, most antinatalists are deeply ethical. They care about reducing suffering. They care about future generations. That is why they believe not creating new life is the safest, kindest option. This becomes even more pressing in the context of global crises. Climate change, overpopulation, resource scarcity. economic instability, political chaos. These are not fun surprises waiting at the finish line. These are baked into the starting conditions. Antinatalists argue that bringing someone into a burning house and handing them a coloring book is not kindness, it is denial. But let us be fair, most people do not see life this way. They feel their lives are meaningful, even with the pain. They believe in growth, love, legacy. They want to share those things with their children, and many do. Millions of children grow up loved, fed, nurtured, and occasionally yelled at for not doing the dishes. So who is right? That is the paradox. Both sides can make compelling arguments, and both are working from different definitions of harm. Antinatalists focus on risk, on the inevitability of pain, on the ethics of consent. Pro-natalists focus on potential, on resilience, on the moments that make it all worth it. One sees life as a burden placed on someone without asking. The other sees life as a gift too beautiful not to share. You can find truth in both, and tension, because life is not one thing. It is 1,000 things. It is sunrise and heartbreak and taxes and music and silence and spilled milk and forgiveness. It is unbearable and magical and deeply strange. And choosing to bring someone into it, or choosing not to, is one of the most profound moral decisions a human can make. That is why antinatalism matters. Not because everyone will agree, but because it forces us to ask questions we usually avoid. Why do I want children? What kind of world would I be handing them? Is my desire worth someone else's pain? How much suffering is acceptable? What do I owe to people who do not exist yet? These are not easy questions, but they are important. And even if you do not agree with antinatalism, you might still respect the caution it brings, the humility, the awareness that creating a life is not a casual act. It is a world-altering choice. In the end, antinatalism does not say, "Do not love life." It says, "Think very hard before you pass it on." Because once a person exists, there is no going back. There is only forward, through the ups and downs, the boredom, the awe, the dental appointments, the heartbreaks, the music, the mornings that feel like promises. And now, as we quietly step back from this philosophical nursery filled with moral dilemmas and existential strollers, I will leave you with one final question. If antinatalists are right, does that mean baby showers are ethically suspicious? Ontological suffering. When existing hurts and you cannot blame it on a paper cut. You are standing in the kitchen. The fridge is open. You are not hungry. You are just there, breathing. A little tired, not sad, not joyful, just a quiet, dull ache in your bones and a strange heaviness in your chest that has nothing to do with cholesterol. That is not physical pain. That is not even emotional pain. That is ontological suffering, the unique discomfort that comes from the simple, inescapable fact that you exist. Let us begin gently. Ontology is a fancy philosophical term for the study of being. It asks questions like, what does it mean to be? What is the nature of existence? Why is there something rather than nothing? Why are you here instead of not here? These questions might seem abstract until you realize that they describe the weight you sometimes feel when you are doing absolutely nothing and suddenly become hyper-aware of your own presence. That is ontological suffering. It is not about what you have. It is about what you are. And that hurts in ways that Tylenol cannot fix. The term is not common outside philosophy books, but the experience is universal. You do not need to read Heidegger to feel it. You just need to be alone with your thoughts long enough for them to start asking questions you cannot answer. Who am I? What is all this for? Why do I feel so separate from everything? Is this it? That last one hits especially hard. Is this it? Not because anything is wrong, but because nothing feels right. You are a conscious being in a chaotic world, constantly aware of your own fragility, your impermanence, your inability to explain why you are even aware of anything at all. You might try to distract yourself, watch a show, scroll, eat, clean your inbox, water your plants, stare into the void of your calendar. But somewhere beneath all that busy noise is a quiet hum of unease that says, you exist, and you do not know why. That is the root of ontological suffering, not heartbreak, not fear, not even death, just being. And that is what makes it so hard to deal with. Because how do you fix a pain that comes from being the kind of creature that asks, why do I exist in the first place? You cannot unbecome conscious. You cannot go back to not knowing. You cannot hit mute on the voice in your head that occasionally sighs and says, this is weird. You are stuck with yourself forever. At least until your time runs out. And even that is not entirely comforting, because if death is the end, then existence is just a long, baffling hallway with no map and questionable lighting. Philosophers have danced with this kind of pain for centuries. Søren Kierkegaard called it angst, a kind of spiritual anxiety that arises not from specific fears, but from the dizzying awareness of your own freedom, your own choices, your own possibility. He believed people experience dread not because of something specific, but because they could choose anything, and that kind of freedom feels more like floating than flying. Martin Heidegger, the guy who made ontology famous again, said that humans are unique because we are the only beings aware of our own being. He called this condition being toward death, which sounds like a motivational poster in the worst office ever. Heidegger said that ontological suffering is not a bug, it is the whole design. To be human is to be aware of yourself, your limits, and your inevitable end, and to live anyway. That is not a comforting thought, but it is an honest one. Ontological suffering is the pain that lives underneath your job stress, your romantic confusion, your fear of missing out. It is the slow, echoing realization that even if everything is fine on the surface, something feels missing. Or perhaps, everything feels like too much. That is what makes it different from emotional pain. Emotional pain has a cause. Ontological pain just is. It is not about what you have lost. It is about what it means to be someone who can lose anything at all. Now let us not get too gloomy. Ontological suffering is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a deeper one. Because once you see it, once you feel it, once you name it, you begin to understand what lies beneath your distractions. You begin to realize that part of being human is carrying this invisible weight of being, with no manual, no warranty, no chance to opt out. And yet, you keep going. You wake up, you make breakfast, you send emails, you love people, you cry, you laugh, you dance in your socks, you forgive, you start again, you carry the ache without needing it to go away. Because maybe the goal is not to escape ontological suffering, but to learn how to live with it, to befriend it even, to see it not as a flaw, but as a sign that you are awake. You are not numb, you are not lost, you are simply aware of the mystery, the absurdity, the beauty, and the strange weight of being alive in a body on a planet spinning through space without a visible instruction manual. And that awareness? That is the beginning of meaning. Because when you admit that existence itself is strange and painful and full of unanswered questions, you stop pretending. You stop pretending that success will save you, that love will complete you, that owning the right type of chair will finally make everything click into place. You stop chasing perfect and start practicing presence. You start noticing small things, how your breath feels, how your dog blinks at you, how the sky shifts color when no one is watching. You begin to realize that ontological suffering is not a wall. It is a door. It opens toward wisdom, toward compassion, toward humility. It makes you kinder to others, because you know they carry the same ache. It makes you gentler with yourself, because you stop expecting to be free of something that lives in the core of human experience. You learn to sit with it, to breathe through it, to let it soften you instead of harden you. And maybe, just maybe, you begin to smile at it. Like an old friend who always shows up uninvited but never really leaves. That is not despair, that is maturity. It is not that you give up hope, it is that you stop needing certainty. You begin to say, I do not know what all this means, but I am here, I am breathing, I am alive, and that is enough, even when it is not. And now, as we step back from the edge of the abyss and return to the strange, ordinary miracle of existing, I will leave you with one final question. If being alive hurts, can you at least expense it? Moral nihilism, when good and evil might just be vibes. You are in line at a coffee shop. Someone cuts ahead, no apology, no eye contact. You are mildly offended. You label their behavior rude, wrong, bad. Then another thought sneaks in, quiet but unnerving. What if bad is just a made-up rule? Welcome to moral nihilism, the philosophical idea that morality itself might be nothing more than a shared hallucination held together by polite agreement and just enough guilt to keep people from stealing forks. Let us start from the beginning. Moral nihilism is not about chaos. It is not about burning down buildings or doing crimes for fun. It is not a Joker origin story. It is a serious ethical theory that claims there are no objective moral truths. None. Not murder is bad. Not kindness is good. Not stealing cookies is wrong even if nobody saw. A moral nihilist says, these ideas might feel real, but they are not inherently real. They are cultural, temporary, made up. And that is where the tension begins. Because for most people, morality feels solid. It feels baked into the universe. Hurting others is wrong. Helping people is right. Lying is bad. Sharing is good. You do not need to read a philosophy book to feel that in your bones. But moral nihilists ask, why do you feel that way? Where does that feeling come from? And once you start peeling that onion, things get weird fast. Let us say you believe stealing is wrong. Why? Is it because your parents told you so? Because your religion said so? Because society runs better when people are not constantly looting each other's garages? All of those are reasons, but they are subjective. They depend on culture, upbringing, and social context. In some places, stealing food to survive is not condemned. In others, it is punished harshly. Same action, different judgment. So the moral nihilist steps back and says, if moral rules change based on time and place, then maybe they are not real in the way gravity is real. They are social inventions, agreements, strongly held preferences that evolved over time to keep people from ruining brunch. This leads us to the central paradox. Most people want to believe in good and evil, but no one can prove they exist outside of human opinion. Moral nihilists are not saying people should behave badly. They are saying there is no cosmic referee handing out points. There is no universal scoreboard. There is no golden book in the sky where your good deeds are logged for later judgment. That does not mean nothing matters. It just means morality might be more like fashion than physics. You wear certain moral beliefs because they fit your culture, your personality, your history. But if you had been born somewhere else, you might wear different ones, and they would feel just as natural. That is unsettling, because it means that what you call right might be a costume, not a fact. Let us dig deeper. Moral nihilism is different from moral relativism. A relativist says, morality exists, but it depends on context. A nihilist says, there is no morality to begin with. Just ideas we pretend are solid, so we do not have to scream into the abyss every morning. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who always sounds like he is halfway through an existential crisis, flirted with moral nihilism. He believed traditional morality, especially Christian morality, was a construction, a way for weaker people to control stronger ones by labeling power and ambition as sinful. He called for a revaluation of values, a total reset. Others, like J.L. Mackie, made the case more calmly. Mackie said that there are no objective moral values because they would have to be very strange things, truths that exist independently of any mind or culture but still somehow motivate behavior. That is hard to explain, and harder to prove. So instead, moral nihilism says, morality is not discovered, it is invented. But here is where things get interesting. Just because morality is invented does not mean it is useless. Think of money. It is not objectively real. You cannot eat it. It has no value outside human systems. But within those systems, it matters a lot. The same could be said for morality. You might not believe kindness is objectively good, but you might still prefer a world where people hold the door open instead of slamming it in your face. In this view, morality is instrumental, a tool, a strategy for cooperation, a social contract we sign without reading because the alternative is too unpredictable. You behave ethically not because you believe in some cosmic good, but because doing so makes life easier, safer, less exhausting, and maybe that is enough. Moral nihilism does not mean being cruel. It means being honest about why you are not. It means acknowledging that morality might not be handed down from the stars, but that you can still choose to act in ways that reduce harm, promote connection, and make this whole weird human experiment slightly less terrible. But that choice is yours. No one is watching. No one is keeping score. That is the freedom and the burden. Because without objective morality, you lose the comforting certainty that you are right. You lose the ability to say, they are wrong because the universe agrees with me. Now it is just your values versus theirs. And you have to make your case without pretending you have the moral high ground built into the cosmos. That is hard. But it is also honest. And honesty, for some people, is more valuable than certainty. Now let us pause. Does this mean everything is meaningless? That ethics is just cosplay? That morality is a group hallucination with good PR? Not necessarily. It means that if you want morality to matter, you have to make it matter. You have to choose it, practice it, defend it. Without a divine instruction manual, without a metaphysical safety net. You become responsible for your ethics, not because you have to be, but because you decide to be. And that, in a strange way, can be more powerful than blind obedience. You are not good because someone told you to be. You are good because you looked into the void and said, even if nothing matters, I will choose to act as if it does. That is not weakness. That is moral bravery. Moral nihilism is not a demand to abandon ethics. It is an invitation to build them on purpose, knowing they might be fragile, and choosing them anyway. And now, as we close the chapter on this softly collapsing ethical playground, I will leave you with one final question. If morality is not real, is it still wrong to take the last slice of pizza? Cosmic horror. When the universe is not evil, just unbothered. You are walking outside on a clear night. The stars are out, glowing like tiny promises. You take a deep breath. You feel small, but in a good way. And then it hits you. You are standing on a rock, spinning in cold space, surrounded by a billion other rocks, none of which know or care that you exist. Congratulations. You have entered the strange, dark fog of cosmic horror. It is not horror in the usual sense. There are no masked villains or haunted basements, no vampires waiting to sparkle or slash. Cosmic horror is not about being chased. It is about being ignored. It is about looking at the universe and realizing it is not looking back. Let us begin with the basics. Cosmic horror is a genre of fiction, a philosophical mood, and a worldview, all rolled into one massive, unsettling burrito. It was most famously shaped by H.P. Lovecraft, a deeply problematic man who still managed to tap into something chilling. The idea that the universe is vast, unknowable, and completely indifferent to human life. In cosmic horror, the monsters are not evil. They are ancient, powerful, and bored. They do not hate you. They just do not notice you. And if they do, you regret it. That is the core of cosmic horror. Insignificance. You are not the main character. You are not even a side quest. You are background static, a passing thought in the mind of something so large, so alien, that trying to understand it might make your brain melt like discount cheese. It is not just creepy. It is existential. Because most horror stories are built around something familiar gone wrong. A home turned hostile. A loved one turned stranger. A clown that does not belong in the sewer. But cosmic horror is different. It says the world was never yours, It was never safe. You just assumed it was because you live in a very tiny slice of it with indoor plumbing and Wi-Fi. Cosmic horror rips that illusion away. It says, there is no plan, no protector, no ultimate justice. Just stars burning quietly billions of light years away, and things, unimaginable things, moving out there without names or morals or need for human company. Let us break this down. Most people carry around a sense of anthropic pride, a belief that humans matter, that we are special, that the universe has some kind of relationship with us, that it likes us or at least tolerates us. Cosmic horror says, no. It says the universe is not cruel, it is indifferent. That is what makes it terrifying. It does not hate you, it just does not care. You are not being hunted, you are being ignored. And somehow that is worse, because at least when the monster chases you, you matter. But in cosmic horror, you are a bug on the windshield of existence, and no one is cleaning the glass. This is not just fiction. It echoes real philosophy. Existentialists like Camus and Sartre grappled with this kind of meaninglessness. Scientists like Carl Sagan reminded us of how truly small we are, and the more we learn about the cosmos, the weirder it gets. There are black holes that erase information, galaxies that will never know about each other, laws of physics that might just be temporary settings. And in all of that, we live on a rock where people still argue about pineapple on pizza. Cosmic horror invites you to really feel that contrast, to sit in the realization that your thoughts, dreams, and emotions are not part of some cosmic tapestry. They are personal, beautiful maybe, but not universal. You cry, the stars keep burning, you fall in love. A neutron star collapses somewhere into silence. You win the lottery. The Andromeda galaxy drifts closer, uncaring. And yet, here comes the twist. Cosmic horror is not always paralyzing. Sometimes it is weirdly comforting. Because if the universe does not care about you, then maybe you can stop trying so hard to impress it. You do not have to be perfect, or heroic, or successful. The stars will not applaud. The void will not boo. You are free. It is not meaninglessness that kills you. It is pretending there was meaning all along. When you let go of the expectation that the universe owes you something, you begin to feel the strange relief of cosmic humility. You are not the center, and that is okay. That means your mistakes do not echo forever. Your failures are not written in fire. Your embarrassment is not a cosmic crime. You are temporary, but so is everything. Cosmic horror also gives you the gift of perspective. When you zoom out far enough, your worst day becomes a speck. Your argument with your neighbor dissolves next to the swirling dance of galaxies. Your unwashed dishes are less threatening when you realize that time itself will eventually stretch them into oblivion. That does not mean you stop caring. It means you choose what to care about more carefully. You love because you want to, not because the universe told you to. You create beauty in a void that will not notice, because you can. You find meaning not in grand answers, but in tiny acts of rebellion against the silence. A poem, a hug, a good sandwich. These are your defiance. You shout into the cosmic abyss and laugh when it does not answer. Because the joke, in the end, is on meaning itself. That is what cosmic horror gives you. Not terror, but clarity. It strips away the comforting illusions and leaves you standing, small and free, in a universe that is not watching, but one that still gives you light, stars, and late-night walks where you suddenly feel both terrified and somehow alive. And that perhaps is the ultimate twist, that in the face of a cold, meaningless universe, you can still choose wonder, you can still write stories, you can still name constellations, you can still look up and say, I am here, even when nothing answers back, because you are not here to be seen, you are here to see. And now, as we quietly close this cosmic curtain and leave the stars to their silence, I will leave you with one final question. If the universe is indifferent, does that mean it also has no opinion on your poetry? Negative utilitarianism, when the best life might be the one that hurts the least. You are making dinner. The recipe is simple. Boil pasta, add sauce. Try not to think about the weight of human suffering while stirring the garlic, but somewhere between steps 2 and 3, your brain begins whispering again. Would the world be better if no one felt pain? Now you have spilled the sauce and stumbled into the ethical basement known as negative utilitarianism, a dark, strangely compassionate philosophy that believes the highest moral priority is not making people happy, but making sure they do not suffer. Let us walk carefully. Negative utilitarianism is a variant of regular, classic utilitarianism. The cheerful belief that the right action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. Think of it as moral math. Add up the joy, subtract the misery, and aim for the highest possible net positivity. But negative utilitarianism tilts the formula. It says, hold on, joy is nice, sure, but suffering? That is unacceptable. Instead of maximizing happiness, negative utilitarianism says we should minimize suffering at all costs, even if that means reducing overall happiness too. That does not sound radical until you follow it to its logical conclusion. Because if suffering is the worst thing, then eliminating suffering becomes the ultimate good, even if that means eliminating the beings who suffer. Yes, you read that correctly. Negative utilitarianism, in its purest form, can imply that the best world is one where no sentient beings exist, because no one suffers in a vacuum, no one cries in a void. A planet with no pain is one with no people. It sounds extreme, because it is. But let us take a step back. The logic behind negative utilitarianism is built on empathy. The idea is not to erase joy. It is to prioritize harm reduction above all else. If you have limited time, resources, or influence, you do not start by increasing happiness. You start by reducing pain. That means you feed the hungry before you throw a parade. You treat the disease before you fund the fireworks. You stop the bleeding before you build the art museum. In practical terms, this makes sense. Much of real-world policy already leans in this direction. Emergency rooms prioritize the most serious cases. Humanitarian aid goes where the need is highest. Therapists treat trauma before they hand out motivational posters. Negative utilitarianism takes this logic and makes it the whole framework. It says that suffering is not just one problem among many. It is the problem. Now, here is the paradox. Most people agree that pain is bad, that suffering matters, but they also believe in trade-offs. They believe some pain is worth it, that growth often comes from struggle, that joy sometimes requires risk, that parenting, for example, is a mix of exhaustion, terror, and deep love, none of which is purely pleasant. Negative utilitarians ask, are you sure that is worth it? They challenge the default assumption that happiness justifies hardship. They say, maybe you only think the joy is worth the pain because you are already in the story. But what if you never had to suffer at all? And that question becomes especially tricky when applied to things like global suffering, poverty, war, injustice, climate collapse. Billions of people living in pain while others enjoy peace. Negative utilitarianism says, if you could stop that pain, if you could end it completely, should you? And if the answer is yes, what if the only way to do that is to end the story altogether? That is where the critics come in. They say negative utilitarianism leads to dangerous territory, that it opens the door to benevolent catastrophes, where wiping out humanity is framed as a moral good because it ends all suffering. Of course, no serious philosopher is advocating for global annihilation as public policy, but the theoretical implication is there, and it is uncomfortable, because it turns compassion into something cold, a kindness so intense it becomes cruel. Let me protect you from pain by making sure you never exist again. That is the shadow side of negative utilitarianism. But let us not throw it out just yet, because the core idea is powerful. The idea that suffering deserves special attention, that preventing pain should matter more than producing pleasure, that ethics should not just be about joy, it should be about justice. In this way, negative utilitarianism is not just a bleak calculation. It is a moral prioritization. It asks, if you cannot do everything, what should you do first? It says, start with the pain. It also forces us to re-examine how much we tolerate suffering in the name of abstract goals. Economic growth, national pride, technological progress. How often do we ignore the cost of pain because we are chasing something shinier? Negative utilitarianism says, do not look away. See the pain. Name it. Reduce it. Even if you do not eliminate it entirely, maybe you make life just a little less unbearable for someone else. That is not nothing. That is compassion with teeth. Still, the philosophy remains controversial, because happiness matters too. Joy is not just a bonus. It is what makes life more than just survival. People endure suffering because of the promise of happiness. They choose to live even in pain because of love, beauty, connection, and the hope that tomorrow might hurt less than today. So how do you balance that? Maybe the answer is not pure negative utilitarianism, but a modified ethic, one that prioritizes suffering without erasing joy. One that says, yes, end the pain, but also leave space for meaning. Because meaning is not always comfortable, but it matters. And people are not just vessels of suffering. They are also sources of laughter, of hope, of dance moves that should not work but somehow do. Negative utilitarianism, at its best, is a call to focus, to look directly at the brokenness of the world and say, this matters more than your comfort zone. It asks you to care more deeply, not about maximizing pleasure, but about minimizing despair. That does not mean shutting everything down. It means opening your eyes. It means asking, who is hurting the most? What systems create the most pain? Where is the suffering that hides in plain sight? And then doing something about it, even if it is small, even if it does not end all pain, even if the universe remains indifferent. Because maybe ethics is not about solving everything. Maybe it is just about refusing to be okay with suffering when you can help ease it. And now, as we slowly back away from this compassion-powered doomsday device and return to the fragile beauty of everyday life, I will leave you with one final question. If the goal is to eliminate suffering, does that mean Mondays should be illegal? Determinism. When free will might just be a very convincing illusion. You are standing in the kitchen, trying to decide between tea and coffee. You hover, you ponder. You eventually reach for the coffee, telling yourself it was your choice, your little act of caffeine freedom. But was it really? What if that choice was already written, not in the stars, but in the wiring of your brain, the mood of your morning, the memory of a bitter Earl Grey, and the fact that you slept funny and now your back hurts? Welcome to Determinism, the philosophical idea that everything, including your deepest choices, happens because it has to. Let us dive in before your brain starts shouting, I chose this. At its core, determinism says, every effect has a cause. Everything that happens is the result of something that happened before it. And that includes you, your decisions, your dreams, your regrettable haircut in 2009. If determinism is true, then everything is part of a giant causal chain. An endless domino line that began long before you were born and will keep going long after you are gone. You think you are deciding what movie to watch. But really, a combination of genetics, upbringing, serotonin levels, and how much you secretly love plot twists already made the choice for you. That sounds dramatic. Because it is. Most people believe in free will, the comforting notion that you are in charge of your own life, that you steer the ship, that your thoughts are not puppets dangling from unseen strings. Determinism says about that. It says that if you knew every particle's position and velocity in the universe, you could, in theory, predict the future exactly. That includes who wins elections, who eats the last cookie, and who gets their heart broken by someone who just needs space. This is called Laplace's demon, a hypothetical being that, given total knowledge of the universe's current state, could know everything that will ever happen. Not because it is magic, but because it is math. But here comes the existential chill. If everything is determined by prior causes, then your choices are not truly yours. They are inevitable results of a chain of events you never started and cannot stop. You did not pick your brain, you did not pick your parents, you did not pick the weather that ruined your mood, but those things shaped your choices. And if that is true, where does you begin? This is the paradox of determinism. You feel free, but you might be prescripted. Now this is where people get defensive. They say, but I make conscious decisions. I weigh options. I change my mind. Yes, you do. But those thoughts and changes are also shaped by your past, your biology, your emotions, and what you had for breakfast. They are caused. You are not a robot. But you are also not a ghost in the machine. You are a very complex biological process reacting to inputs, patterns, and maybe some unresolved feelings about high school. This does not mean you are meaningless. It means you are entangled in a web of causes stretching back to the Big Bang. Your actions are real. Your intentions matter. But they might not be as independent as you think. Now let us address the big screaming question in the back of your mind. If determinism is true, does that mean nothing matters? No. But it does mean we need to rethink responsibility. If someone acts badly, say, lies or hurts someone, and their actions were determined by factors they did not choose, should we blame them? Should we punish them? This is not just abstract theory. It affects how we treat criminals, addicts, and people who make terrible choices. If we accept determinism, maybe the focus should shift from blame to understanding, from punishment to prevention, from condemnation to correction. You do not hate a computer for having a bug. You fix the bug. Maybe people need that same kind of grace. On the other hand, determinism does not let you off the hook completely. Just because your choices are caused does not mean they are meaningless. You still make decisions. You still live with the consequences. The fact that a river flows one direction does not mean you do not get wet. You still need ethics. You still need love. You still need people to show up and do the hard thing even when it feels predetermined to fail. And here is the twist. Some philosophers believe free will and determinism can coexist. This is called compatibilism. It says, yes, everything has causes. But free will is about acting according to your motives and desires, even if those desires have causes. In this view, you are free when you are not coerced. When you act in line with who you are, even if who you are was shaped by things outside your control. You are still you, just more causally entangled than you hoped. Others reject that. They say compatibilism is just rebranding determinism in a friendlier font. They argue that true freedom means being the ultimate source of your actions. And if determinism is true, then you never are. You are more like a wave in the ocean, real, moving, but never separate from the sea that made you. Now let us get weirder. Quantum physics, with all its unpredictability, throws a wrench into hard determinism. At the tiniest scales, events are not always predictable. They happen randomly. Some say this restores free will. Others say randomness is not freedom. If your choices are caused, you are not free. But if they are random, you are still not in control. So what now? Freedom, it turns out, might live somewhere between illusion and illusion. So where does that leave us? You are a conscious being in a universe that might be pre-written. Your choices might be shaped by forces beyond your awareness. And yet, you keep choosing. You love, you regret, you hope. Maybe that is the real miracle. Not that you are free in the absolute sense, but that you live as if you are. That you take responsibility. That you ask better questions. That you make peace with the mystery. Maybe freedom is not about control. Maybe it is about awareness. Knowing that you were shaped, but choosing to shape others with kindness. Knowing that you are determined, but still daring to be different. And now, as we step away from the tangled web of causes and effects and return to your regularly scheduled illusion of choice, I will leave you with one final question. If all your actions are predetermined, can you still blame the universe for your karaoke song selection? The myth of Sisyphus. Why rolling the boulder might be the point. You wake up, you stretch, you make coffee, you check your email, you sigh, you delete half of it, you reply to one thing, you stare out the window for a while. Then you go back to everything that feels like it barely matters and somehow still needs doing. And just like that, you have entered the ancient Greek tragedy of modern existence. Welcome to the myth of Sisyphus. Let us begin with the basics. Sisyphus was a king in Greek mythology, a clever one. Too clever. He tricked the gods, broke divine rules, cheated death twice, and caused enough cosmic chaos to earn himself a special punishment. The gods, never known for their chill, condemned Sisyphus to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity. Every time he reached the top, the boulder would roll back down, and then he would start again, forever. That is the story. It is short, strange, and deeply relatable, especially if you have ever done laundry. But the myth got its real moment of philosophical fame in the 20th century when Albert Camus, a French philosopher with excellent eyebrows and a love for existential discomfort, used it to explore one big question. What is the meaning of life if life is meaningless? Camus called it the absurd, the space between what we want from the universe, order, purpose, clarity, and what the universe offers us, silence, randomness, and the occasional coupon code. He said human life is like Sisyphus's task, repetitive, effortful, and ultimately futile. You work, you rest, you eat, you clean, you build things, you lose them. You search for meaning in a universe that might not contain any. That is the absurd. And most people, when confronted with the absurd, try to escape it. They invent religion. They lean into routine. They find grand narratives or cosmic plans or multiverse theories that make everything feel less random. But Camus said, what if we stop running? What if we accept the absurd? What if we admit that life might not have a higher meaning and still keep living anyway? That is where Sisyphus rolls back in. Camus looked at this doomed rock pusher and said, yes, his task is meaningless. Yes, it will never end. But in that moment when he walks back down the hill, when he has no illusion left, when he knows the rock will fall again, he is free. Because he knows the truth. He accepts it. And still he pushes. Camus famously ends his essay with the line, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Not because he is in denial. Not because the rock is secretly magical, but because in the face of absurdity, he chooses to endure. He finds dignity not in the outcome, but in the effort. This flips everything. Most people are taught to live for results, success, rewards, legacy. But Sisyphus has no finish line. His only reward is the ability to keep pushing. That is both horrifying and liberating. Because if life has no higher purpose, you are no longer obligated to chase one. You can stop running toward the perfect life, the perfect job, the perfect explanation. You can live here, in the struggle, and find meaning in the doing itself. This is what Camus called revolt. Not rebellion with pitchforks, but rebellion as a mindset, a refusal to give in to despair, even when despair seems logical. To say, this is absurd, yes, but I am still here, still moving, still making soup. Sisyphus becomes a hero, not because he escapes his fate, but because he faces it without flinching. Now, let us bring this down to earth. Maybe your boulder is work, or parenting, or being chronically misunderstood by your group chat. Maybe your hill is depression, or debt, or a dishwasher that keeps leaking no matter how many times you Google it. You push the boulder, it rolls back down, and still, you show up again the next day. This is not weakness, this is absurd strength. You are not waiting for the universe to clap. You are not banking on enlightenment. You are doing the thing because it is the thing worth doing, not because it saves the world, but because you are in it. Now, critics of Camus have raised questions. Is it really enough to just push the rock? Should we not demand more? Fight the system? Break the cycle? Maybe use a lever, or call OSHA? But Camus was not saying we should love suffering. He was saying we should face reality without illusions, and still choose to live. That choice in the face of absurdity is what gives us power. Not cosmic power, but personal power. The kind that says, you can take away meaning but not momentum. That might be the most honest kind of heroism, because it does not require perfection or victory, just a willingness to keep going, even when no one is watching and the hill is steep. This also reframes success. If life is a loop, then success is not reaching the top. Success is walking back down and starting again without bitterness. It is brushing off your jeans, patting the rock, and saying, all right, let us do this again. You become a kind of existential craftsman, working your task, knowing the limits, still finding beauty in the rhythm. Now, do not get it twisted. The Myth of Sisyphus is not a motivational poster. It is not saying, keep grinding, champ. It is saying, you are stuck here, and that is okay. It does not offer escape. It offers presence. In a world obsessed with shortcuts, hacks, and 15-day transformations, Sisyphus reminds us that some things do not resolve. They repeat. And maybe that is where the richness lies. In the repetition, in the showing up, in the absurd dance of pushing a rock just to watch it fall, then picking it up again with defiant joy. So what does all this mean for you? It means you might never find the ultimate answer. You might never win the cosmic lottery. You might never get the closure you think you need. But you can still push the boulder. You can still love people. You can still write things, fix things, plant things, help strangers, sing off key, try again, laugh too hard, and cry in the produce section. Not because it all adds up, but because you are alive, and that is already absurd enough to be meaningful. And now, as we reach the top of this philosophical hill and watch the boulder begin its quiet roll back to the bottom, I will leave you with one final question. If Sisyphus had a Fitbit, would it still count as cardio? Terror management theory. How death anxiety secretly runs everything. You are scrolling through social media. Someone is showing off their abs. Someone else is holding a baby. Someone has just built a tiny house out of bamboo. And deep down, in a place you rarely check, something ancient stirs. It is not envy. It is not curiosity. It is the quiet reminder that you are going to die. Welcome to terror management theory, where death is not just a grim fact of life. It is the secret engine behind most of what people do. Let us break it down before it breaks you down. Terror management theory, or TMT for those on nickname terms with existential dread, is a psychological idea developed in the 1980s by three researchers, Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Pischinsky. They were not trying to scare anyone. They were trying to explain why humans do the things they do, especially the weird, intense, emotional things that seem way out of proportion. Their conclusion? It is all about death. Not because people are always thinking about death consciously, that would be exhausting, but because somewhere in the background, like a system update you cannot uninstall, the awareness of mortality quietly shapes your thoughts, your actions, and your identity. You know you are going to die. That is the problem. And everything else is a very elaborate solution. Now, most animals do not have this issue. A squirrel does not contemplate the end. A turtle does not fear its legacy. A cat, despite its dramatic behavior, does not wake up in existential crisis over climate change. But humans? Humans know. You know. One day, everything you are will stop. Your breath, your thoughts, your search history, all gone. That is not just sad. That is terrifying. This is where the terror in terror management theory comes from. The theory says that humans manage this terror by clinging to cultural worldviews, systems of meaning, belief, and value that make life feel bigger than individual death. Religion, national identity, political ideologies, moral codes, legacy projects, hashtags. These are not just ways to live. They are ways to not crumble under the weight of mortality. If you believe in something bigger, something eternal, then your life feels connected to it. Your death becomes less final, less frightening. you become a soldier in a larger story, a note in a grand symphony, or at least a well-edited blog post in the infinite internet of meaning. TMT proposes that people build up self-esteem as a buffer against death anxiety. Not the vanity kind, the existential kind. The belief that you are a good person living a meaningful life in a world that matters. Because if you feel valuable, then maybe death does not win. Maybe you live on in memory, in influence, in reputation, in that one quote someone prints on a mug. But here is where things get spicy. TMT research shows that when people are reminded of death, even subtly, they cling harder to their cultural worldviews. They become more defensive, more aggressive, more tribal. In one study, participants who were reminded of their mortality became harsher in punishing moral transgressions. In another, they showed more support for people who shared their beliefs and more hostility toward those who did not. In other words, death anxiety does not just make you scared, it makes you protect your identity like it is life itself, because symbolically it is. This helps explain a lot. Why people get so emotionally invested in sports teams. Why they defend political views with religious fervor. Why internet arguments escalate like medieval duels, even over the pronunciation of GIF. People are not just defending opinions, they are defending the structures that protect them from existential terror. You think you are arguing about pineapple on pizza, but you are actually clinging to the illusion that your taste preferences mean something in the face of entropy. And maybe that is beautiful, or maybe it is absurd. But either way, it is happening. TMT also helps explain why people want to be remembered. Legacy becomes a form of immortality. If people say your name after you are gone, part of you still exists. Not physically, but symbolically. And symbols, as it turns out, are pretty powerful. Think of statues, awards, gravestones, viral tweets. They are not just expressions of identity. They are attempts to carve a small dent into the marble of time. It also explains why people fear being forgotten. Because to be forgotten is to die twice. Once physically, once in memory. And that second death is often the one people fear more. The quiet, slow erasure of everything you were. So what do people do? They perform, they curate, they accumulate, they join causes. They attach themselves to movements that feel bigger than them. They try to matter, not because they are vain, but because the alternative, pure, meaningless disappearance, is unbearable. Now, let us pause. Terror management theory is not saying people are lying to themselves. It is saying that people need meaning structures to withstand the horror of being finite, that without those structures, anxiety leaks into everything like a gas with no smell. You panic, you avoid, you numb out, or you start building shrines out of personality quizzes and productivity hacks. But here is the twist. TMT does not tell you what meaning to choose. It just tells you why you probably chose one. That is both freeing and destabilizing. Because if your beliefs are, in part, a defense mechanism, then how solid are they? If your identity is shaped by a desire not to die afraid, then what happens when you admit that? You do not have to throw everything out, but you might start asking better questions. Am I living by choice or by terror? Am I chasing legacy or escaping fear? Am I building meaning or stacking distractions like sandbags against a flood? These are not comfortable questions, but they might be the most honest ones you ever ask. And if you do ask them, really ask them, you might find something else. You might find that the fear does not need to be erased, just acknowledged. You might learn to live with mortality instead of against it. To see life not as a race to beat the void, but as a chance to dance around in it for a while. You might start doing things because they are worth doing, not because they guarantee you will be remembered. You might stop trying to outsmart death and start outliving fear. And that is not easy. But it is real. And in a world full of meaning projects, realness is its own kind of immortality. Because maybe the goal is not to live forever. Maybe the goal is to live well, knowing you will not. To create beauty in a world that ends. To love people who will disappear, To laugh in the face of loss, not because you are brave, but because the alternative is to stay silent forever. And now, as we softly place this theory back into its psychological display case, and breathe through the quiet knowledge of our inevitable expiration date, I will leave you with one final question. If death anxiety shapes everything you do, can you blame it for your impulse purchases at 3 a.m.? Bundle theory of self. You are not one person. You are a pile of stuff that thinks it is you. You are lying on the couch. You feel tired, but your mind is buzzing. One part of you wants to finish the documentary. Another part wants a snack. A third part is still angry about that thing from 2016. And suddenly you are wondering, if I am one person, why do I feel like a committee? Welcome to the bundle theory of self, a very old, very strange idea that suggests you are not a unified being, but rather a loosely organized pile of experiences wearing a name tag. Let us start at the beginning. The bundle theory comes from the 18th century philosopher David Hume, who spent a lot of time thinking about thoughts. He asked a question most people avoid. What is the self? Not your name, not your job, not your favorite pizza topping, but the you underneath all that. And when Hume went looking for that you, he could not find it. He looked into his own mind and said all he found was a stream of impressions, sensations, emotions, thoughts, bits and pieces, no core, no permanent soul, just flickering moments, like a slideshow with no narrator. So he proposed this radical idea. The self is just a bundle of perceptions, no fixed center, no real me, just a collection of things happening in sequence. You are not a pearl, you are a string of beads, and the string might be imaginary. Now that is unsettling. Most people believe in a core self, a real me that stays the same through time, something stable, something permanent, something that ties together your baby photos and your current caffeine addiction. But bundle theory says, that thing you think is permanent, it is an illusion created by memory and language. Let us pause and take that in. If Hume is right, then you are not a single being moving through life. You are a constantly updating bundle of experiences that just happens to call itself I. There is no secret room inside your head where the true you is sitting. There is only the swirl, your hunger, your thoughts, your fears, your inner playlist, your childhood traumas, your to-do list, your weird dream from last night, all happening. None of them are you, but together they feel like you. That is bundle theory. It is kind of like your browser history. Each tab tells you something, none of them tell you everything, and half of them were opened accidentally. This idea is strange, but it is not new. In fact, versions of it show up in Buddhism, where the self is also considered an illusion, a constantly changing collection of 5 aggregates: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Nothing solid, nothing that sticks. You are like a sandcastle that keeps reshaping itself with every wave of thought. Now, let us ask the obvious question. If the self is a bundle, who is doing the bundling? This is where it gets slippery. There is no bundler. The bundle just happens, like clouds forming in the sky, or traffic forming for no reason at all. You are not behind the thoughts. You are the thoughts. That voice in your head narrating everything, that is just another part of the bundle, no more the real you than your elbow. Bundle theory suggests that consciousness is not a flashlight beaming from your soul. It is a flickering sequence of mental events, a slideshow with the illusion of motion. So what keeps it together? Memory, habit, language. You remember what you did yesterday, so you assume continuity. You say I and assume it points to something stable. You string your experiences into a story, and the story becomes the self. But a story is not a thing. It is a structure. Your self is not a statue. It is a process. And like all processes, it can be disrupted. Think of someone with amnesia, or someone dreaming, or someone who has had a little too much wine and is crying over a song they claimed to hate last week. Where is the real self then? Is it missing? Or was it never there to begin with? Bundle theory says, you are not missing anything. You were never a single thing. You are always the bundle. And here comes the weird comfort. If there is no single self to protect, maybe you can be a little less anxious about defending it. Maybe you do not have to cling so hard to your identity, your brand, your sense of consistency. Maybe it is okay to change. Because if the self is a bundle, then change is what it does, not what happens to it. Your preferences, your beliefs, your feelings, they shift. That is not failure. That is functionality. You are not a rock. You are a river. This idea can also explain why people contradict themselves. Why you feel brave one day and terrified the next. Why you love someone deeply, but also want to scream into a pillow because they chew too loudly. Different parts of the bundle are showing up at different times. That is not hypocrisy. That is complexity. Your brain is not a monologue. It is a panel discussion with no moderator. Now, critics of bundle theory say it is too reductive. They argue that people do feel continuity. That the self is not just scattered impressions. It is something that holds together, even across change. They ask, if you are just a bundle, how do you recognize yourself in the mirror? How do you feel embarrassed about something from 10 years ago? The answer might be narrative glue. You build a story about yourself, a memory network, a way to make sense of the mess. And that story, while not solid, is sticky enough to feel like a person. You are not a soul, you are a story, one that rewrites itself constantly and pretends it has not. Bundle theory is not saying you do not exist. It is saying you do not exist in the way you think you do. You are not a permanent unit. You are a flowing pattern. And maybe that is not bad news, because if you are not fixed, you are not trapped. You can change your habits, your values, your style, your narrative voice. You can rebuild, rebundle. You can become someone new, not because you lost the real you, but because the bundle is always updating. You are not a thing, you are a becoming. And now, as we gently unbundle this theory and place it next to your other favorite mental paradoxes, I will leave you with one final question. If the self is just a bundle of impressions, can you return it for store credit?